Hello. Hello. Let's see. By gum. Hopefully my voice holds up for this. Hello everyone. Right then, so this was of course first went out as a recorded video on the 1st of November and was most requested as please do a live. So I'm doing a live on it. But it's now on the 6th of January 2023, so it's now a very different day. Hello Retrospect. Hello 96831. Hello John Shea. Hello Jack Ray. Hello Matcha Dostal. Hello Dunrick Ironhammer. Hello Paul from Chicago. Hello Michael Cooch. Hello Mark Harkness. Hello Touch Verschell. Weak everywhere, strong nowhere. Yep. I don't know. I have a... Let's put it this way. I have a similar scenario sometimes. And I can understand to an extent what was going on with Coronel. Hello Mark Harkness, DH89, Frank Sposado, hello everyone. Not a Wolf, hello. And hello Byron Newman, and DG40, and Colin Cameron, and Stephen Richards, and Calvin Gaswick. Hello everyone. So, I sort of have an idea of the Battle of Coronel, because this will sound strange. I have someone in my family who is very bright. Very, very bright. I love them dearly. They're family members, so we always love all our family members. Thankfully, I don't have to work with them or be around them that often, because this trait would annoy the life out of me. And none can make you quite want to take their life, because quite as family members, but I have this family member who is always trying to do everyone else's jobs. Basically, if you have chores assigned to you, because especially if you have a family get-together over Christmas or New Year, you'll have maybe, let's say, sometimes as many as 30, 40 people, 50, 60 people together in a sort of normal year for my family sometimes. Sometimes you'll have as little as 3, but sometimes you'll have far bigger. And you'll have your jobs that you're going to do as part of it, you know. Someone will bring this, someone will bring that. Well, there is one family member who will always try and race through all the chores to do everyone, and basically will then spend their time telling people that anyone they've done the chores of, oh, well, you did nothing, I did your chores. And you sit there and go, yeah. Classic example, this happened to me this year. They actually blocked me out the room, because while they were doing their chore, they did their chore in such a way they blocked access to the whole room. And they did 3 other people's chores in the same room at the same time. Because it's quite a big room and we all had different things of prep to do, but they blocked the door so no one could get in without disrupting them. So you're sort of going, yeah, but the trouble is you've done it, and you've done it badly because you're rushing so you could do it, so you've ended up having to redo it, which takes longer. Now, why does this give you an insight to the Battle of Coronel? We all have sort of some family members who are sort of like that. Well, the Battle of Coronel comes about because everyone is trying to be involved. Everyone has an idea, a different idea that they know what's going on. However, there are a fair number of naval professionals who do know what's going on. There are 2 specific ones who do realise what's going on quite easily. One of those is, of course, our friend, Christopher Craddock, who's part of this battle. But the other one, who I'll also be discussing today, is a gentleman called Patey. Now, he knew exactly what was going on, and actually had the warships to do what it needed to be done. He was one of the few concentrations of warship firepower in the area that could have intercepted von Spey's force. But, no, someone else had other plans for him. Generate, that person sounds insecure. Yeah, they are. Well, it's problematic. If I consider a few things they've done, it's the problem is because they rush through the chores and then they don't do them properly, and then you end up redoing. And as anyone knows, the quickest way to make a 5-minute job into a 5-minute chore or a 20-minute chore into a 2-3 hour slog is for someone to try and do it in half that time, do it badly, and you end up needing to clean up the mess multiplied that they created. And this is the Battle of Coronel. There are lots of people who know what they should be doing, but there are also lots of people who have good ideas and who want to be involved. And the trouble is, you have to remember you're dealing with not just a military, but a government which hasn't been involved in a major war in a very long time. Let's put it this way. Napoleonic wars were ruthlessly run by the British governments involved. They usually were coordinated through 2 or 3 ministers at maximum, with the other ministers having little to no say or anything to do with the war. They would be the Colonial Office and the War Office, and usually the Senior Secretary of State. That would be it. The Admiralty, of course, but the Admiralty would be a sort of operational level. Coordinating, deciding the strategy, etc. would go on with all the other options. War Office, Admiralty, pretty much interchangeable in that sort of function. They would have their roles. They would do that. You have, during the first part of World War I, pretty much every single person with the title Minister is writing to every general, admiral, every person they know with instructions and ideas. And the trouble is the staff needs to respond to these because you can't ignore someone who has that level of ego. This means this takes up a lot of staff time because, believe it or not, when you're responding to the Secretary of State for, I don't know, let's see. Let's go through the 1914 cabinet and find the most absurd minister of a post in there. Let's see. We're going down the list. There is a few. Assistant Postmaster General. If a gentleman called Cecil Norton, well, sends you a message, you have to pay attention. But no, let's go even lower. Let's go lower. Let's go even further down. Yes, the Lords in Waiting. Yeah, because they're a member of the House of Lords. So between 1914, well, you have Lords in Waiting who are assisting the government in the House of Lords. You have the Viscount Allendale, Lord Ashby St. Ledgers, and Lord Stanmore. Now, let's see. Lord Allendale was, well, how do I put it? Let's look for his exalted military history and knowledge. No, he was a member of Parliament from 1895 to 1907. He attended Eton and Trinity College, Cambridge. So that's him. Viscount Wimborne. Elected to Parliament by Plymouth by-election in February 1900. He was commissioned as a lieutenant in the Dorset Yeomanry on 9th May 1896. He volunteered for service as appointed to a lieutenant in Imperial Yeomanry in the Second Boer War and won the Queen's South Africa Medal. Returned to England, UK and promoted to a captain on 8th of January 1902. Yeah. Well, that's good experience. Let's be honest, being a lieutenant and a captain does equip you for strategic high command and to be telling admirals and generals what to do. And then we've got George Hamilton Gordon, 2nd Baron Stanmore. Let's see. He was enlisted in the Hampshire Regiment, but in January 1922 transferred to be a captain of the 3rd Battalion, the Gordon Highlanders. And, yeah. He then carried on serving. And by the way, for those who want to know, Lord-in-Waiting is basically the version of a government whip in the House of Lords. It's just, these are the people who can start interfering and take up your staff time. And that would be problematic on its own, but let's be honest, prior to World War I, the armed forces and the governments of the world had not really been thinking about how to fight a war. There had been this well-publicised naval race, but let's be honest, that's just the most visible and high-profile of the arms races going on in the run-up to World War I. You have the scramble for empire, which, let's be honest, everyone takes part of, and before the Americans here on this channel, if anyone wants to try and say they didn't, there is this little thing called the Spanish-American War. Which is, yes, I suppose, technically taking it from the Spanish Empire, but that might not be direct colonialism because the colonies had already been established. But still, it's blooming close. And then, of course, we have Russia, which is just... well, which is an empire. Let's be honest. There is the reason it was called the Russian Empire originally. And this is also a problem, because if we think about it, the Admiralty only gains a staff because they end up fighting a political match with the army, and the army goes, "We have a staff! So we're prepared for war. And we have plans, which we can give you on pieces of paper." And the Admiralty's sitting there looking at them going, "Yeah, we know you have plans. We read them in the newspapers because you print them on paper. We don't consider them secure at all. Or sensible." But the trouble is, there are problems in defending this position. In that politicians like something they can hold in their hand. They like to be able to go, "I have a plan." You know, if you want to see recent politics in the world, how many times are politicians waving around a piece of some papers in front of them, which are often a few pages thick, so they look weighty, as if someone's got detail in there. They probably have a cover page and then some blank pages behind, but let's be honest, that's me being cynical. They like plans. The Navy had plans, they just weren't written down. Because the Navy didn't need to have those plans written down, because the Navy were professionals. Because Fisher had spent the last, 20 years, along with others, beating the unprofessionalism, staid Victorianism out of the Navy hard. Secondly, the sea tends to kill off people who aren't either lucky or very good enough at their jobs to stay afloat. And C, and this is the important one, the Navy's plan for a war was pretty much reenact Napoleonic War Stage 2, which was blockade and take out their colonies around the world. It's not exactly the most strategically complicated plan in the world. It's brutally effective. Please, do not get me wrong. It is brutally effective, but we shall implement a blockade. How? Using the stores we have built up in the UK, basing from the basing facilities we have built in the north of England, in this cold place in north of Scotland, and we are building these facilities. We shall place a fleet there, and then we shall block the Germans into the North Sea, and then we will go around the world hoovering up any German ships and colonies which aren't there, which aren't protected by the North Sea. It's not the world's most complicated. It's a sledgehammer strategy. It works. But also, you sit there and go, so, you need a detailed timetable plan for it? And by the way, it turned out the Army's strategic plan for World War One, which they kept going on about was so brilliant, was basically a load of train timetables. It was get the troops to France. And then they weren't sure what to do with them once they got there. And they have all sorts of different ideas for once they get there, but they have none of that really confirmed. It's basically train timetables and ferry times. How to get to France. Woohoo! The next up, let's see. Where does Mahan thinking affect RN Ops in World War I and Battle of Coronel? To an extent, it affects it in that you've had Corvette and you've had all the British thinking that's come about because of a result of the British view that the American, especially the headlines for Mahan. I would agree with a good former friend B.J. Armstrong that that Mahan is often unfairly maligned in that you focus in on headlines, which are the big fleet actions and the focusing, and that is because that's from the American perspective what matters to them, because they don't have the global trade and global maritime empire. But Corvette was the one for the British, and that was the global maritime empire. Dr. Clarke's 3 easy steps to become a politician. 1. Get a stack of paper. 2. Write the plan on the front page. 3. Wave it around saying you have a plan. I know you mean that in jest, Dunrick Ironhammer, but just cast your mind back to the politics of the last, 50-odd years in the West, and many other parts of the world, and think about what has happened. If I remember correctly, Baldric was both elected to Parliament in a rotten borough and then made a member of the House of Lords. Sure, I would also say that naval operations are much more variable, also much easier to transpose because ships carry logistics in a tactical sense, armies don't. There is to an extent that. There is to an extent. There is also the fact that prior to World War One, the various navies and armies in the world have all sorts of different approach to it. Navies, there is no point having a timetable like the army timetable. The army had this very big question mark over ferries to the across the channel. And that was lovely, because they said, well, if there's a storm, this will delay our movements. So it's easier to go in these months of the year. Well, for the Navy, if there's a major storm, A, you're supposed to still be out in it, and B, it is going to affect your ships, and it's going to damage ships. And there's also the fact that if a battalion is stood down for some reason, to stand it back up is not an easy task, but it tends to be, on the whole, less complicated than if you've got a ship with its engines removed, getting reconditioned, sitting in a dry dock with its gun turrets off, its engines out, and its funnels off. One of those is going to be a battalion compared to getting that thing back in the water in any time soon. Getting a battalion back ready to go back from being stood down to being stood up is administration. It's not. I'm not saying getting the battalion is easy. Please note, I'm not saying that. I'm saying comparing one task to the other. One is administration. One is, oh my lord, this is going to be months. Mark Harness, Nelson, because if you're not doing Nelson, then obviously you're not doing right, so I'm not actually in the Navy. Well, the thing was, the real scenario thing is, actually the Royal Navy's plan was Nelson's. Blockade until they come out, then beat them up. Germans, didn't Colbert basically want to repeat the strategy of the 7-Year War? To an extent. To an extent it is the strategy of the 7-Year War, but it's, as I say, it's the Napoleonic War strategy as well. To be fair, it was the Royal Navy strategy for hundreds of years, and it worked well for them. To be honest, I would have thought the Navy plan was obvious when Fisher built battlecruisers. Let's rerun the plan for the last 300 to 400 years. It seems to work. And of course, as we all know, naval strategy is build strategy. Sure, Mac. At least to an extent it. Now, it's fun. It is fun. And it gets... how do I put this politely? It gets more complicated the more you go on. Now, the German East Asia Squadron are an interesting force. They are established in the mid-1890s and will be there until 1914. It was based in what the Germans called the Kiaksha Bay Leased Territory area. Now, this, of course, is territory on the southern coast of the Shandong Peninsula, and it's often referred to by me and many others as Tsingtao, which is what it's called of in the 1920s and 30s when the Japanese and the Royal Navy keep turning up there. Because the Japanese take it off the Germans. Modern day, it's known as Qingdao. This was territory which the Germans were very keen on having. It was one of their key points in the sun. And the idea was the German colony in China would give them a coaling station to support their global naval presence. And it was hoped that this would also allow them to exploit the Chinese market. Because believe it or not, China was the most, was considered by many, far more important than America, as the most important non-European market in the world. Reason was, American built their own stuff. China, thanks to keep fighting amongst themselves, didn't. So it was a case of, we can sell them whatever we like. Basing a fleet out here was almost the ultimate hubris. Because, how do I put this politely? The reason the Germans were apparently building a fleet was to square up to their old friend, the British, who they were going to replace as the world leader, even though the British had a far larger empire and a far larger fleet. But the British were going to stand aside in face of German superiority, as the Germans would build up a fleet big enough the British couldn't dare challenge them. Because, of course, the British would stand still their fleet and not build any more ships, while the Germans were building ships. It's always helpful when your enemies are going to do exactly what you want them to do. It takes a very special kind of personality to presume that you can build a massive fleet and your opponent will do nothing about it. They will not attack you or respond by building their own larger fleet. I don't know. But no, the Germans put a squadron out in East Asia because the Americans have a squadron there, the French have a squadron there, the British have a squadron there, the Dutch have a squadron there. So of course the Americans need one, the Germans need one. And in 1896, this had been the East Asia Cruiser Division had actually been commanded by the then Rear Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz. Yep. The bright spark who ends up pushing for the naval build policy and the Navy laws which create the naval race directly between the naval race, well, add the dimension to the dreadnought naval race that is between Britain and Germany. The whole experience of the Germans in the Far East can be summed up as this. The response to the Juillet incident in 1897, when two German Roman Catholic priests at the Stella Mission in Juillet country in Shandong were murdered by the Big Sword Society. The admiral in charge of the squadron wired to the Admiralty, may incidents be exploited in pursuit of further goals. In which case, von Hohenlohe, the Chancellor, counselled caution, and Kaiser Wilhelm intervened and said, proceed to Kiaksha with entire squadron. I do so. And of course the Admiral responded to proceed, it will proceed with greatest energy. Basically, however any time anyone turns around and goes, what is the point of having this presence? What is the point of this empire? What is the point of having any of this? Wilhelm gets involved and shoots them down. And any time someone comes up with the idea of, let's get more, let's do more, let's be bigger, Wilhelm encourages them. This is why when the Philippines, there's all the battles in the Philippines going on within the Spanish-American War, after the battles are over, the Germans turn up. Because they're hoping they can seize the Philippines from the Spanish, because the Americans, they think, won't be interested in it. Also, at one point, they consider, there are various reports, okay? There's one book which assesses that the Germans considered trying to intimidate or encourage or guide the Americans to forgo the colonizing the Philippines in order to let the Germans have it as a way of getting a friend in Europe. And the ultimate thing we can think is this. If the Germans had had the Philippines and even more territory in the Far East prior to World War One, they'd have just lost more territory in the Far East prior to World War One, because any ships which are out there are not back at home, which weakens the high seas fleet, which weakens their force at home. So if they send a strong squadron here, that helps the Royal Navy. Remember what the German plan for World War One is. Basically, try and take off as a chunk of the Royal Navy that they can overwhelm and destroy with minimal damage, so that they can even up the numbers. Well, all this empire does for the British is present the chance, the more the German to reinforce it, of that actually the Germans doing that to themselves, of them having a large chunk somewhere else in the world that the British can then swallow up and go, hello. Even the Goeben and Breslau, for all they do in tying down resources in the Mediterranean, etc., because of their presence in Turkey and, well, the Ottoman Empire, also represent a big loss to the German fleet. Because for every one ship the British are down, that's one in a large number than every one ship the Germans are down. Every single ship represents a far larger percentage of German fighting strength than it does for the British. What happens? Except that into a non-navy, Nelson means annihilation of the enemy, so definition of Nelson in versus out of the navy. Yeah. That's a block ship. I call block ship. The Germans do not understand what it means to be a superpower. Well, no, just because they do, you don't need to understand what it means to be a superpower in order to try and think you're going to be a superpower. Everyone thinks they're going to do it their own way. Let's see, who may have had the greatest effect on this battle happening the way it did, but was not even alive when it happened? Sadly enough, on causing this battle to happen the way it did happen, I don't know. Probably one of Churchill's ancestors. Let's see. Let's blame his father. That's probably easiest. Lord Randolph Churchill. Now, this means that when war does break out in 1914, German East Asia Squadron has a choice. They have a choice. And it's an interesting choice. It is. Believe it or not, it's a very interesting choice. The choice is this. You can fight a battle and gloriously die in the Far East, or you can sail to South America. Now, why is this the choice? Well, we'll get on to the reason it's the choice very quickly. in a few slides, in fact. But let's first consider what their choice they do make. Now, their theoretical role is to try and defend the Far Eastern Empire of the Germans. As we can see, they don't really do that. They mainly gather their forces together. They pull them in from all around the world. One of the joys of this thing is that the Dresden, if we look, you can see, actually starts off World War I in the Caribbean. Let me just check that one, because I could be reading the map wrong, and I have been driving all day, so my brain is not necessarily the most reliable. Yeah. He goes to the South Atlantic. Yeah, he starts off. My brain was going, it's right, and I was going, I don't trust you, brain. Because every time I read that, I think that is the most stupid decision they make. If any ship could have actually potentially made it home, it's probably the Dresden. Now, let's be honest, that's a light cruiser, and a Dresden class light cruiser has what? 10 4.1-inch guns on it. 4 that can fire forward, 4 aft, and broadsides of roughly 5. But it's still a fairly modern cruiser. It's 1907 in case of Dresden. It's a fairly modern, useful vessel. And it does carry torpedo tubes. Hello, Tim and Ellen Moran. Hello, Thomas. Austria-Hungary also had a Far East cruiser. Having a single ship out there is, for the Austro-Hungarians, it's fun. It's just, yeah. Honestly, actually, Frank Spada, if we go back to Zed, Kaiser Wilhelm's grandfather, who indulged him and decided that, frankly, his own son was too weak, and did everything he could to undermine Frederick III, is more than likely, along with Otto von Bismarck, is probably the person who caused it most. And then there's von Bismarck himself, who, well, died in 1898. And again, had done a lot to put Kaiser Wilhelm and inflate Kaiser Wilhelm's ego. So let's be honest, quite a lot of this happens because of Kaiser Wilhelm insisting on having a fleet out there. Right, Coach, if the Germans had invested in infrastructure, floating oxide, how would that affect the strategic picture? It would have given the British more prizes, and probably made them go after it themselves rather than letting the Japanese have it. Germans. Wasn't Turpin's idea that Germans only need a navy large enough to cost of fighting them high enough the Germans wouldn't want to pay it as they were challenged by the US, French, or Russians? Yes. His entire plan was that the British would the Germans would lose the war. British would lose so much that they'd immediately be destroyed by the French, the Russians, or the Americans, so they wouldn't want to fight it. The trouble is, again, that requires the British standing still. Because if you're working out you're going to cost the British this many ships, well, the British can always build more ships. So yes, they still cost that money, but remember, this is the power which had the two-power standard. Which was basically that they were always as large as the next two largest powers combined. That's going to be a pretty significant... If you got... That's a problem to try and overmatch. Wayne's Water Science. But a wildlife empire might have led the Germans to have a more rational naval strategy. Well, I suppose they could have imported more opium from China. That might have made it more rational. Thomas Van Welt, the first thing I always did in the Civ 3 World War I mod was withdrawing all these ships back to North Sea and keep negotiating until they're there. Pure waste, if you ask me. Mm-hmm. Listen, were the Imperial Germans that delusional? No way in fighting the British Empire, we're just going to stand aside. Yet no British Empire response. No British Empire will be bring it on. That's the basic problem with the Risk Fleet strategy. As a strategy, the Risk Fleet is really not sensible. And its closest it comes to chance is actually when the British themselves shoot themselves in the foot. And that's the only reason it's really mentioned as a cause of war, because it causes the British to panic, because the British try off with building one dreadnought and then 3 battle cruisers and then go, oh frick, other people are building dreadnoughts. Oh God help us all. We thought if we built one, that would mean everyone would not want to build battleships. Oh great. Oh yeah. So let's be honest, there's plenty of stupidity to go around. Plenty of it to go around. Hello, Ruhon. Yes, the idea was that Britain would become... that the Germans would, with their mighty fleet, would be powerful enough that Britain would come begging for an alliance. When then Britain didn't come begging for an alliance, the Germans then found themselves in trouble. As Mark Hardis points out, that mean British naval and vast actual survival depend on someone else's goodwill. Better to ally with people who don't threaten your naval security. Bingo, and we've all seen what the French were actually building. Amelia Barrow, Kaiser Wilhelm, friends of the British, also Kaiser Wilhelm. I need the biggest battleships. Yeah, he was a bit of a strange one. His most cherished possession is often argued to be his admiral's uniform for the Royal Navy. So, war breaks out, and, well, the German squadron, thankfully, is in saner hands than those who sent it out there. What does this mean? Well, the commander sits there, thinks, and goes, how am I going to survive? Well, if I stay here, I'm dead. Especially once the fact that multiple powers getting involved on the side of each alliance automatically triggers the Anglo-Japanese naval alliance. And it's interesting. Because that's the other problem. You see, however big a squadron you, as Germany, can maintain into the Far East, the odds are the full Japanese Navy is going to be bigger than you. So all the Royal Navy really needs to maintain out there is enough force that they can play credible second fiddle to the Japanese Navy, and let them do the killing for them. It's even better for the British. You have to understand, the German force in the Far East is the British dream. Not only is this squadron cut off with usually decent leaders and decent crews, because it's the showpiece of the German Navy, so it's some of their most skilled, most capable officers and men, and their most skilled, some of their better ships, in terms of training experience, but they will be killed, not by the British having to send a massive fleet to get them. No, no, no. The Japanese will do it. So, not only will this cause a loss to the Germans, right? It will be at no expense to the British. It's a dream. It's basically, the stronger the Germans make the East Asia Squadron, the happier the British are. On a strategic level. On a tactical level, the local commanders are going, this could be interesting. But there again, on a tactical level, the local commanders have HMAS Australia, which single-handedly could wipe out the entire Von Spee squadron. So, because Maximilian von Spee is the commander of the East Asia Squadron in 1914, surprise, surprise, and there is the problem. That you have a choice. You can either fight the entire Japanese Navy and be annihilated, or you can fight HMAS Australia and be annihilated. You have a choice. How do you wish to meet your doom? Well, he decides he'd rather not. So he decides he's actually quite a smart officer, and he goes, well, if I go north, I get clubbed by them. If I go south, I get clubbed by them. I cannot, for the life of me, go east because there's land in the way. And I'd have to go south first, and that means I'm going to run into that thing. So, or rather, if I go... Hang on, no. Oh, west, I get meet land. So I go east. I'm going across the Pacific. And yes, I have already touched on this. There is, of course, also in the Japanese Navy at this point, commissioned, freshly, pretty, etc., as of August 1913, Congo, as of August 1914, Hawaii. Yeah. Congo and Hawaii as well, you know? you have your choice. You can choose. Yeah. Basically, a NATO-style alliance was possible in pre-World War in Europe, and if so, would Kaiser Bill want to join it? Well, why would they have one? Let me put this point. The reason NATO comes about is because there's a massive, massive threat to everyone. So they draw together. But in the system of alliances that exist in this period, etc., draw together, are because there are lots of little threats. Each one's a threat to an individual power. And so you go, right, I've got you. This guy's a threat to me. They're annoying. However, you are a threat to him. This is France and Russia, for example, with Germany in the middle. So if I ally with you, then we can ally against each other. And the Germans go to the Austrians, go, well, whoa, we're in the middle between the French and the Russians here, so we better ally together. And then the Italians go, we want to be friends with someone. And the Austrians, well, let's be honest, the Austrians are the main thing they actually don't like. It's the Austrians versus the Italians, and the Germans somehow get the two to both ally with them. And it's a case of the Germans are going, yes, we built this alliance, and everyone else is looking at them going, you have basically got an alliance, two powers who would willingly throw down with each other. You don't really understand this alliance plan, do you? And the fact is that World War I starts the way it does, honestly, probably increases the likelihood of the Italians not joining in on the side of the Triple Alliance, because honestly, it's Austria which is the one which has the upset. They have the murdered Duke. They have, heir to the throne gone. Ouch. And then they have to go. They go, well, declare war on Serbia, which leads to declaring war on Russia, declaring war on them, and all these sort of fun things. And well, that's the Austrians, who the Italians don't like. No, it's not a good scenario. So no, I don't think a NATO-style alliance would have been possible in pre-World War I. Mark Arness, British doctrine. Who is the strongest power in Europe? Make his life lonely and precarious. Exactly. Why do the British like allying with America? It's a long way away from Britain. That should have managed to amass a major navy by entirely relying on Britain to do the naval work for them. It had worked quite well, and in return the British Empire had usually paid for the Prussian army. That's possibly one of the problems. The Prussians are seeking... Because you have to remember, the Germany, as its time, was really the Prussian Empire in anyway. Because the way von Bismarck had formed the Germany, and the modern state of Germany is formed by Bismarck. Please, no one think anyone else should get any credit at all. They are merely functionaries for Bismarck. There are not very... most of the great man power of... great men and men of history idea I do not prescribe to. There are very few who achieve all they're given the credit for without a massive group behind them working for it. Bismarck and the formation of Germany into a modern state, considering how often he has to work against everyone to undermine everyone in order to get what he wants, and play everyone off against everyone, is probably one of the few I do actually ascribe to. And it was really the Prussian Empire. And this is a problem, really, because the Prussians are seeking the money for themselves. They want the money Britain's always given them to fund their army to fight the French. Guys, funny enough, Germany, Austria-Hungary and Russia was the Holy Alliance, which would have been a tough cookie had sanity prevailed, but didn't. Oh, good lord, the Holy Alliance. Yeah, the Holy Alliance was an interesting conglomerate of people who were also willing to kill each other as well. That's one of the reasons why it fails. No, having an alliance with people that want to murder each other. No, we wouldn't do that again, would we? There's always alliances going on with people that really want to kill each other. In NATO, we still have powers in NATO who would quite happily, culturally, take each other out. Sadly enough. But as long as you have a bigger threat to face, that tends to, make, if you're being sensible, tends to make you drop that as a problem. Now, Von Spey is, well, he's a character. He's definitely one of the better admirals in the German Navy, and definitely one of the better thinkers. I would argue, though, there is an interesting discussion with him, and I've brought this up before. The amount of people who come, well, if he made it back to Germany, he would have been, made this or that. It depends. If he'd scuttled his ships in Tsingtao, got his sailors together on land, taken them across China, through Central Asia, avoiding British territory, or at least only clipping in places where there weren't many British troops to block them, so avoiding anything controlled by the British Indian Army, or anything controlled by the British Colonial Office, or the any of the people sitting in Delhi. And, well, Calcutta and that other little village, and carried on, and made it to, I don't know, the Ottoman Empire, and managed to get through that way, he would have probably received some plaudits, but he certainly wouldn't have received anything great. He'd have got the people home, though. He'd have sacrificed his ships, though, which would have been an embarrassment, but there again, he got the people home, so he would have brought home a lot of trained crew, etc., so they would have been annoyed with him, but in the same way the British government were annoyed with Vickers for getting caught, rather than for actually what they did. The Germans would be annoyed with him for admitting that their position was strategically hopeless, not for what he did. But doing that is an incredibly dangerous route. It's incredibly difficult, and the likelihood of succeeding is actually very low. Plus, you have to remember, he has sailors, not soldiers. They're not really equipped to go on a land campaign. And the moment he gets rid of ships and puts them in such formation, then he has to work out what to do with the Marines and the other troops which are in Tsingtao. Does he take them all with him? Does he take everyone with him? Travel as far as he can on train and then go on foot. It's an absolute nightmare. So his other options is to go away by sea. And that's what he does. He has under his command Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, of course, his 2 armoured cruisers. Top speed 22 knots, armed with 8.3 inch, that's 21cm guns, 6 15cm, 5.9 inch guns, and 18 8.8 centimeter 3.5 inch guns, and 4 45cm 70.7 inch torpedo tubes. Now remember, in this period, and I will say this is the case in this period, the guns which do the most of the fighting are not your big guns. They're your 6-inch guns, usually as a rule, because of rate of fire. But 8.3s are still pretty good. Thomas Vanderbilt. Apparently Germany was already amassing stocks of money by bank reforms in 1878. They called it financial mobilization at the Reichsbank. Yeah. Well, that's the point which Alex pointed out. Alliance of Britain was providing the battle line and Germany in the army. Not possible because of the Kaiser, unfortunately. Yeah. That was actually a fairly decent alliance scenario for Britain and for Germany. Honestly, the British would... If you consider what the British give the Japanese, if the French and the Russians had kept arming like they were doing, and the Germans hadn't been building a navy, the British would have undoubtedly formed an alliance with Germany as well. They'd have probably done that to preserve, so they could counterbalance the Russians. and the French. At which point, the French have the experience of the Franco-Prussian War, which was bad enough when the Royal Navy weren't involved. The Royal Navy were actually involved. Lord help the French in the Franco-Prussian War. And then you'd have had the potential of the Prussians being involved to fight the Germans. As well. And then the Germans being involved to fight the Russians. Sorry, brain. Again, please note, lots of driving today. 1 4-hour trip and a couple of trips as well. It's been fun. That would have given them a lot of strength. And actually, building a fleet of cruisers like this would not have worried the British at all. Now, the interesting question which people tend to support if I'm talking about this, to go, well, under those circumstances, the British still get the Dreadnought first. Probably. Why? Because the British don't build the Dreadnought considering Germany. You see, the Dreadnought is built to an extent as part of the debate with Germany, but it's part of the wider naval race going on, which involves Italy, France, Russia, Japan, America, South American nations. All sorts of powers are building up battleships. The British need to find a way to reset the counter and give them an advantage. And frankly, that would have done. And if the Germans hadn't copied with building dreadnoughts themselves, the British would have gone happily away, and probably that would have actually taken the foot pedal of the guest. Taken the pedal off the gas of causing issues between Britain and Germany. Where's what science and technology? Global firepower has updated their ratings. Russia is still number 2 somehow. Because Russia has a lot of area they can cover. Russia has global reach by fact of geography rather than fact of capability. And that gives them a lot of power in the global firepower metrics. Not necessarily gives them a load of capability. Now, the other option which some people point out, donating Shah Norton Nightingale to Istanbul, that is another option he could have done. He could have donated the fleets and told them to come and collect them. But the thing is, the British would unlikely to let them past. The British would have found a way to impound those ships at Singapore. They would have never made it to Istanbul. They would have run into HMAS Australia, and she would have gone, heave to, or be destroyed. Go into Singapore. Which point they'd have been given the choice of, well, we can fight, but our speed is 22 knots and we have 8.3-inch guns. You have 12-inch guns. And a lot faster. This is not good. Well, some Australian and Hungarian sailors did manage to get home, but only a small part of a crew of a single cruiser, not a force of a few thousand. What changes if the Mokta was there with these ships? Well, let's see. If you have a battle cruiser there, and let's be honest, the one out there would have been a Mokta. Well, she's still limited. She then has a problem. She can either operate solo, in which case she has a top speed of 25 knots, or she operates with these vessels, in which case she's going to be limited to the top speed of whichever vessels are slowest with them. She does have 10, 11-inch guns. However, the moment you have a battle cruiser out in the Far East, what are the British going to do? The British have no choice at that point. They know what a battlecruiser is capable of. They have battle cruisers running through the Mediterranean trying to catch up the Goeben. They would have had more battle cruisers out trying to catch up with the Moltke. Yes, potentially she'd have had a one-on-one with Australia, but also there is potentially our old friend of this channel and the vessel which we have voted several times most likely to manage to skip along without any trouble at all, HMS New Zealand. In fact, there is quite the potential that you would have had, instead of you'd have had the full of the I class, i.e. Invincible, Indomitable, Inflexible, Indefatigable, New Zealand, Australia, out hunting. So you'd have had two of those in the Mediterranean hunting Goeben. You'd have had New Zealand and Australia probably together in the Far East, part of the Australia, part of the station out there in the Far East. And you'd have probably had two more, let's just go Inflexible and Indefatigable, combined sitting down in the Falkland Islands. Why? Because that is actually, broadly speaking, the British plan if there is a battle cruiser. And remember, Moltke would have been actually out there if World War I hadn't started in 1915. And this is the point. If it hadn't started till 1915, there is then another option goes in. Because whilst you still have the Eyes in service, they were of course commissioned in 1908 and 09. Then you have the Indefatigable New Zealand, which were commissioned in 1911 and 1912. Lion Princess Royal, 1912. Queen Mary, 1913. Tiger, October 1914. So she'd have very much been in service and been in service for quite a while by if World War I had held off to 1915. And you might have even had the next batch of battle cruisers begun, because let's be honest, the British begin Renown and Repulse in 1915, but they also have Queen Elizabeth class floating around. And so the thing is with the Moltke, because she can do 25.5 knots is a design top speed, but if she's not got access to best coal, that's going to go down. The British do know that. That means a Queen Elizabeth class could probably catch her. That's her real problem. That suddenly gives the British quite a lot of ships if it had waited until 1915 when Moltke was deployed, that could be deployed in various positions to catch her. Serenity in, but do cruisers make sense for a defense of Germany? I would think battleships would still make sense of them, just a lot less of them. Probably you'd be talking about coastal battleships for defensive of Germany and cruisers for their global reach. I don't know, would Germany still be taken seriously as a great power if they didn't build dreadnoughts? That's an interesting question to see. A counterpoint to that one. Despite Russia having only a single aircraft carrier, do you still take them seriously today? Did we take China seriously as a global power, as a powerful nation, as a great nation, before they had any aircraft carriers in the service? Anything of those days? Because yes, dreadnoughts in wartime, I will give you, there are various things which are capabilities, and you can talk about nuclear weapons, etc. But in peacetime, status units, you can go around board and you can be a great power with them. There are certain big status units you need. They change in period to period what they are. But let's be honest, in this period, it's sort of by the point, these ones, well, Dreadnought is out, so that's the way. You have Dreadnoughts, but then you have carriers, and carriers are still ones around to this day. I'm sorry, but Von Space offered enough. Giving Warspite more kills is just unfair, because we know it'd be her. It might have been Queen Elizabeth herself. Queen Elizabeth was who wandered off the Mediterranean to go hunting, basically, Goeben. Basically, the entire reason they lured HMS Queen Elizabeth out to the Mediterranean Command was, yeah, the Goeben might come out and attack the force when it's coming out to engage the forts in the Dardanelles. And so Queen Elizabeth comes along going, Yes! Lead me to my captured pretty. I know where she is. She'll be my prey. My coach, Malk versus Australia. Even if Malka wins, she loses because she'll take in heavy damage, which can't be repaired. That is the ultimate problem for these squadrons, because there is no repair out there. His cruisers, Leipzig, Dresden and Nuremberg. And this is where you start to get really interesting things going on, because, as we know, last two ships, top speed 22 knots. These ships, 24.5 knots for Emden Dresden. For Stuttgart set in Nuremberg, 23.5 knots. For Leipzig. Well, for Leipzig. And this is the point at which you all start feeling slightly sorry for him as a rule. Leipzig had a top speed of 22 knots. So, top speed of this force, as a whole, 22 knots. Now, that is with quality coal in them, and that is fresh, with their keels nice and clean and their hulls trimmed and everything perfect. 22 knots is the top speed of this squadron. Hello, pre-accusers. So, I've got a counter question. Is Holland considered a great power in 1914? I think it was, at least in the top 10 nations. Did they have any battleships? 0. The Dutch, often considered one of the great powers. Take care of Mealy-Borough. Just imagine the Argent Corps. You think that that was in planning, showing up and saying hi to the East Asia Squadron? Von Spee would have swallowed his dentures. Yeah, this is the other trouble, because if the Argent Corps that I think, and let's put it this way, if either the Argent Corps I think or the Argent Corps Drac thinks, Drac of course, remember, thinks it's going to have triple turrets. I think it's got 18-inch guns coming in it. If either of those comes up, 6 18-inch guns or 9 or even 12 15-inch guns shows up, yeah, with 28 knots top speed, that's just not fair. That's just not fair. That's not playing cricket. That's being very, very cruel and unusual punishment. No, it's not have A and be a great power, but more can you be a great power without A? Well, that's always the question. And there's usually context and nuance for a reason a nation is considered a great power. I haven't found any decent political cartoons in the case in relation to Von Spain's Voyager and Coronel. So he has cruisers and he has cruisers. He has armored cruisers, he has light cruisers. He has a mixture force. And that's not a bad scenario to be in. That's not a bad capability to have. Grispel, could Coronel being postponed at all? Was Craddock too aggressive in delivering his orders? I'll be getting into that, but broadly speaking, not really, because of the other circumstances going on. One of the things that often gets forgotten, and this is the scenario I sometimes get into and causes me trouble. And let me check. Make sure I have got this up. But the trouble is for Craddock is there's a lot of different things taking place, and there's a lot of different options going on. But no, he is not being too aggressive. Broadly speaking, he has limitations in what he can do. He really does have limitations in what he can do and what he can achieve. And that's mostly thanks to the scenario he's been set by his own, well, by his own side, really. Done. So what were the Cullen-class light cruisers? Not here. Basically, the Cullen-class are the last ones commissioned before the end of the war. Cullen and Dresden are the two completed. And they are the ones completed before the end of World War One. They are... how do I put this politely? Both scuttled and Scapa Flow in June 1919. Both scuttled and Scapa Flow. And his orders were fairly explicit, but also there is a problem. I started off this by discussing the various different people giving out orders. One of the biggest problems of those is actually Winston Churchill, who gives out so many orders that it gets problematic to try and work out what he actually wants. Sorry. Yes, mate. I've got it. I have got it in this one. Okay. Whew. Just checking I had a slide in this. Spay aggressive, he doesn't have any choice. Choose between plague or chlorel, as we say. It was an issue mainly for Spay in that he has these ships, and they're not... Let's look at them honestly. None of these ships are really great in 1914. They're good ships as light cruisers, they're good ships as armor cruisers go, but in 1914, none of these are ships you want to find yourself in a battle with the British Grand Fleet in. Not unless you've got a lot of other ships there. As Paul Richards pointed out, Craddock is told he possessed sufficient forces. His doom is sealed. Yeah. Winston Churchill is good sometimes, bad. When Winston Churchill is good, he's very, very good. When he's bad, there's problems. There's a lot of problems. Now, the thing was, in the Pacific, there is this beautiful creature, this wondrous capability. And this is the point I'm trying to make here. Not a single one of these ships, even the entire fleet, could really stand up against this thing. Especially not when we consider that during the operation that was going on, ooh, remind me to spell his name correctly. This is the trouble when I'm looking through my notes quickly and I'm getting them up. If I forget to spell names correctly, I can end up in all sorts of weird areas. Now, this force is under the command of Admiral Patey. And Patey is... well, how do I put this politely? Patey knows how good he is. He is promoted to Vice Admiral in September 1914. Now, he was the first commander of the Australian fleet. He was technically a rear admiral commanding Her Majesty's Australian fleet. His Majesty's Australian fleet at the time. However, he gets promoted to Vice Admiral while out there, and he almost turned down the post when he was told it's not going to be a so instead of being Commander-in-Chief station, it's going to be a Rear Admiral commanding. So that means I'm not going to get the office and residence and all the things I deserve all day. Well, I'm better than that, so I'm not going to take it. And they basically ended up having to give it to him. He is put in charge, and when I say put in charge of, he is in charge of the fleet which takes the German colonies. And goes around the German colonies hunting for von Spee. Now, von Spee, of course, had quickly withdrawn, but Patey is running around with HMS Australia. Okay. Let's think about that. And HMS Sydney, a town-class cruiser, 1912 vessel, very capable. HMS Montcalm and HMS Encounter. Now, I don't know. That's it's the French ship Montcalm, isn't it? Not that one. Yeah, it's the Montcalm is the French cruiser, and HMS Encounter. The Challenger class protected cruiser, which had been transferred to before she was transferred to the Royal Australian Navy. So he's wandering around with a force which has, well, let's be honest, 3 fairly decent cruisers. Not amazing. The Montcalm is certainly not amazing, but they're enough cruiser firepower that the Germans aren't going to be able to launch a torpedo attack on him. And he's got this thing with its 12-inch guns to go, hello, goodbye. And the thing is about Patey is he's good at his job. He has concentrated force. No matter what the orders are coming in from various people outside, he's a C&C Australia, he's a Vice Admiral, he's got the status, he's concentrating his force and he's telling everyone to... Within the limits that he can ignore commands coming from home, telling him to send his forces off elsewhere and divide his forces up, he is ignoring them. And he's good. And he, of course, has Australia as his flagship. And Australia, well, she has a top speed of 25 knots. Sydney has a top speed of 25.7 knots. Montcalm has a top speed of 21 knots, but his actual decision was he would leave her behind if he had to. And Encounter has a top speed also of 21 knots. And again, I would point out that when it comes to going around, he does actually keep leaving the other two behind. His plan, at first, was to go to the German colonial capital of Rabaul, which was in New Guinea, which they felt was another place where the Germans might be, and send in the light cruisers first to try and lure the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau out, and then Australia would come and pounce on them. They found, unfortunately, no German ships in harbour, and so they searched the other harbours. So she takes part in the New Zealand's occupation of German Samoa, as Patey believed that the German fleet was likely to be in the Eastern Pacific, and therefore going to Samoa would be a logical move, so taking it over with New Zealand troops was going to secure it and stop the Germans getting there. However, the problem was, and this is where Patey really comes in, at the same time as he was taking New Zealand troops to seize Samoa, the Australians were sending their own troops to seize New Guinea, German New Guinea, and Patey learned of that expedition after they commenced their journey, so he did what he could. And he did quite well. The Admiralty refused to allow him to leave his station, though, to go and hunt down von Spee. And that's what he wanted to do. He predicted, and very strongly predicted, and when I say very strongly predicted, he writes a letter home to his family basically predicting this, and talking about all these things, that he was wasting time hoovering up German colonies while von Spee was heading east. The most sensible and only solution for the Germans was to head east, and this is Patey. When he gets permission to head east, finally, on the 8th of November, he manages to coal and reach Shamala Bay after 12 days on the 20th of November. He's made commander at that point of a multinational squadron tasked with preventing the German squadron from sailing north to Canadian waters, or following them if they try to enter the Atlantic via the Panama Canal or around Cape Horn. Patey's ships were Australia, HMS Newcastle at this point, the Japanese cruisers Izumo, Azuma. Oh, some very nice vessels have arrived. And the ex-Russian battleship, the Hizan. So he has 3 Japanese ships, which he can also move around. They go to the Galapagos Islands and search there for 6th December. Finding no trace of On Space Force, he heads to the South American coast. And at this point, they find out that the German squadron had sailed for the Atlantic via Cape Horn and was defeated by a British fleet attempting to raid the Falklands on the 8th of December. He was only let off the leash to go hunting, if we consider this. "7 days after the Battle of Coronel. So the Battle of Coronel takes place on the 1st of November. He's allowed to go hunting von Spee on the 8th of November. And the really, really annoying thing for anyone thinking about this is if, let's put it this scenario, if he'd been allowed to leave when he first started asking leave, it takes him 12 days. No, let's be honest. With the other ships around him, actually, no, he reaches that. So, let's say it takes him 18 days to reach there, to reach to Mexico. If he was aiming for where he was in South America, probably about 20 days. So, he needs to reach there by the 1st of November. Which means he needs to have left by about the 10th of October. He had reached Suava on the 12th of October, and that's when he asked permission. So, there is a very real possibility that if he had been on the 12th of October given permission, instead of being ordered to patrol Fiji, Samoa, and New Caledonia, if he'd been given permission on 12th of October to go racing across the Atlantic, racing across the Pacific. Sorry. Racing across the Pacific. On 12th of October, there are, and please let me be quite sure, there are 31 days in October. So 20 days takes him to roughly the 1st of November. Roughly the 1st of November. Give or take a bit. If he'd received a message, which he probably could have done, because let's be honest, the wireless signals are good enough, from Craddock, because Craddock would have been, he would have probably told Craddock what was happening, and he was coming across. It might well have been a case of Craddock would have messaged him, gone, "I don't have a battleship. Help." Or rather, "Sir, it's good to know you're coming to this area and taking command as Vice Admiral and Senior Officer on the station. Very good, thank you. We have reports of the enemy fleet in this area." And let's consider the Battle of Coronel as it could have been. The Battle of Coronel could have been British cruisers on one side, the Germans going, "Why aren't they running? Why aren't they running?" while the British cruisers just continue on together. And then coming up from behind the German fleet comes the lovely Australia. Hello! So just when the Germans are doing their long-range bombardment on the British because they can, suddenly this thing's up behind them doing the exact same thing to them from behind that they do to the British. They do to the British squadron in the Battle of Coronel. They would have then had to turn to engage or try to run away from her, which would have given a chance for the British cruisers to actually close the distance, which could have led to a very different battle. And instead, she is left sitting where she is. In case the Germans double back is probably the reason you could go for. But if the Germans double back, let's see, how many ships were the Japanese prepared to send? Oh yes, a battleship and 2 armoured cruisers. Yes, they're pre-dreadnoughts. Who cares? There is nothing in this squadron that can fight that Japanese force. That is the entire reason for the Anglo-Japanese alliance. So you can free up your own units. AKA this thing. Unfortunately for Patey, he's that role of being Commander-in-Chief Australia. Let's put it this way, if you're a squadron commander, you can ignore things to an extent. But when you're a CNC of an actual area, you have to have permission to leave your area. That's the thing, because you are the Commander-in-Chief. Let's put it this way, if he leaves an area without permission and something goes wrong, not only is his career over, but his entire staff and everyone on board the ship who's let him do it, his career is over, because he is the CNC Australia. That is the difference. Patey needs permission because he's CNC Australia. But that doesn't happen. But Australia and Patey is the reason why Von Spey has had to go the route he's had to go. It's why he's having to do this. So let's get into the people giving those instructions to Patey and Craddock. Well, we have Frederick Doveton Sturdy, who is... Okay, please note, he's not necessarily a bad officer in charge of a squadron. He can run a squadron quite well. He's not someone you want dealing with politicians, keep telling him notes of where to go and got to be here and got to be there and got to be everywhere. Because he tries to be nice to them and he presumes they must know something that they're talking about because they are the elected representatives. The other problem is that he is an easy scapegoat. It's kind of like Seymour is for BT. He is an easy scapegoat to blame things on. He should not have been in the post he was in, and honestly, in any other scenario he probably wouldn't have been. But it's a case of, where do you put an officer like Sturdy when you have other needs for other officers? Now, it's very easy, and please note, again, kind of like with Seymour, there are many accounts which are written which will spend their entire time slagging off Sturdy. I don't necessarily agree with them all. There is a point at which, how do I put this, modern training tends to colour a lot of people's judgments. In that, you have to remember there is no such thing as staff school in a college in these days. There's no such thing as strategic school. So, to a certain kind of brain, the idea of putting ships everywhere, the idea of putting the ships everywhere and being present everywhere is how he's fulfilling the criteria being given to him by the politicians. He's dealing with the criteria coming down from his commanders above. Now, the problem is, a less dutiful officer, i.e. a less pedantic officer, would have said, these are my instructions, and then if the commanders-in-chief in local areas hadn't followed them, he wouldn't have followed up trying to force them to do it. But a pedantic officer will do. An officer who was a better strategist and was also more confident in themselves when dealing with politicians would have found a way to adapt those orders to do something more sensible, because even he knows it's not the sensible idea to do to have these forces spread in penny packets all over the world and be weak everywhere and strong nowhere. You have to concentrate force and respond. An officer who was stronger would have told the politicians to wander off and go somewhere, or ignore them completely. This is where I wish you could change around officers in history, because one of the things we have to consider with Admiral Sturdy is that when he is Chief of Staff, or Chief of the War Staff at the Navy, at the Admiralty, Chief of War Staff in the Admiralty, well, he is, of course, a Vice Admiral, which he'd been promoted to in December of 1913. Now, here is the point. And I'm just about to make, is that another officer we talked about earlier had been made Vice Admiral in 21st of September 1914. And that, of course, was Patey. Now, Patey had been given the CNC Australia post because he was good at dealing with politicians. And he was in many ways, his next role, this is another thing which if World War I holds off to 1915, the thing is, the odds are Patey has to come back from being CNC Australia, and the post he was likely to get in the Admiralty was going to be this: Chief of the War Staff. So, you could have had a very different officer in the post. But the Royal Navy had been scrambling around for someone to set it up and do an admin role. And preferably someone who wasn't going to, in peacetime, was going to be fine in it. And he was in peacetime, he was fine. He just wasn't necessarily what you wanted in wartime doing the role. And there are some people going, oh, he's good at dealing with politicians. No. Let's put it this way. He's got the connections, so he's acceptable to politicians. He can speak to them. But he's not good at dealing with them, in that he doesn't tell them no, and he doesn't tell them to ignore them, or tell them to bog off. He tries to deliver on everything he promises. When a politician goes, oh, you've got to have a ship covering here, you've got to have a ship covering there. When Churchill, who keeps coming in and trying to micromanage all these things, is basically placing ships out as if they are soldiers on sentry duty around the world. As if you can place soldiers like ships like sentries all around the world to learn stuff. Because he hasn't learnt these lessons yet. He learns these lessons as World War I goes on, which is why, in many ways, he's far better in World War II, because he learns by mucking up a lot in World War I. Not that he's always great in World War II, but he's not always bad. He's actually quite good in some ways. He's very good if you're the Navy and you want to fight for your budget. You've got to hold that. You've got to accept the good with the bad. He's good for fighting for your budget. He's not good if he's trying to micromanage the fleet. Because he tries to run the Navy like it's an infantry company, which is what he knows, because that's what he's used to understanding the command. He understands cavalry and infantry. He understands how to run them, you have the cavalry running around, which are your capital ships, and then you have your infantry who are on picket duty all round, which are all your other ships. Yes. We'll get into Churchill another time. But the thing is, Sturdy is the one trying to interpret all these orders. And the big problem is, at the same time, the first Sea Lord is dealing with a huge amount of political issues. Now, the first Sea Lord, up until October 1914, is Prince Louis of Battenberg, who is actually a very good officer. Please, do not consider Battenberg a bad officer. He is a good naval officer. He just has the wrong name. Mainly because of his German name, his sounding name, he's forced to resign. But he's actually a good naval officer, and probably slightly better in some regards for running a navy than Fisher was at this point. Because as good as Fisher is, Fisher has his big ideas, whereas Battenberg tends to actually include more people in his thinking and actually work things through more sensibly. And so Fisher is recalled. And what does Fisher spend October doing, and most of October doing? Well, once he's been recalled, he's got to stamp his authority on it everywhere. He's got to change things. He's got to order new battle cruisers. He's got to do this, that, the other. He's doing all those things, so he's still leaving stuff to Dove and Sturdy to run around. So this is the other problem. You've had Battenberg, who's been fighting for his naval career because of his name, dealing with politicians causing trouble because of that, and leaking stuff to the press, half of which I sometimes suspect is down to actually Fisher machinating to get the top job for himself again, and wanting to be called back. And basically stirring the pot happily over his successor. And you've got Sturdy, who doesn't have the capability to say no to the politicians, and basically the officers above him, who are supposed to be dealing with those politicians, are not able to do their job because one is constantly fighting his own political battles, and the other one, when he gets in post, is so busy doing his own plans, he's not taking any notice of what anyone else is doing. This is the problem. This guy is not equipped to be doing this job, and the people above him who are supposed to be dealing with these problems are not doing their jobs. And in the case of the level above that, which is Churchill and the Secretaries of State and the various ministers, actively interfering in him doing his job by keep changing the tasks. And yes, you can say he's pedantic. He is. Yes, he's got all those problems. But also, he's not in a position for which he has any training experience or really is the proper person for. You needed Craddock would have told him to draw pistols and shoot each other, and Patey would have just gone the same as he did with Australian politicians when they annoyed him. Hello. Please, come to have dinner aboard my battle cruiser. And he liked to have dinners. And this is a story I read about him while doing this. I'm not sure if it's 100% true. But he liked to have his dinners arranged in front of either the forward gun turret or the aft gun turret. So they would be eating and he'd be discussing them while they had 12-inch guns looming over them. Just to make his point. And yes, I have to admit, one of the things which Fisher does do is he does free up Patey. He does turn around and go, Patey, go hunting. But by the time Patey goes hunting, it's too late. And it's a week after Coronel. It's a week after Coronel. And he has to meet up with the Japanese and, all those things. And so, 8th of December 1914, there's no chance of him really making that appointment. Not with the criteria put on him. He could have got across a lot quicker. And then we have poor Craddock. We really do have poor Craddock. Because Craddock is a capable naval officer. He's a brave naval officer. He's not necessarily the best and brightest, but he's also not a stupid officer. And that's the trouble, is saying someone's the best and brightest in this period means you have to say they're better and brighter than Jellicoe. And really, Jellicoe is a once-in-a-generation mind in terms of naval officers at this point. So, Craddock is still a very good officer, and I would have actually preferred him rather than Beatty in charge of the Royal Navy's battle cruisers. He'd have done a better job. But leaving that to one side, he has a problem. He also is turned into a scapegoat afterwards, because he sends a note, and this is the way you send message to Navy's written as a phrase, and it's used by naval officers. My intentions are. Now, when a naval officer sends that to a more senior officer, basically, that means you have given me these objectives. My intentions are to accomplish them this way. And I will do that unless you order me otherwise. Now, there is a reason you phrase these things like this, because you might know more than I do, and if therefore there's a problem going on, you have to tell me. So it's a way of getting information out of your senior officer as well. Craddock sends a signal to Churchill on 27th of October, advising the Admiralty of his intention to leave Canopus behind because of a slow speed, which had become an issue, and to take his remaining ships in search of Spey, restating that he still expected to receive reinforcements in the form of HMS Defence, which he had believed was still on its way to reinforce him. But of course, Defence, and I'll get into her story, was returned to the Mediterranean, and then we sent again to form part of a new squadron patrolling the eastern coast of South America, just in case the Germans got past him. But let's consider Craddock, and let's consider what he actually is. He is 52 years old when he dies. He had joined the Royal Navy in 1875, so this is someone who has had 39 years of service in the Royal Navy. He's not some random Rear Admiral either, he's a very experienced officer. When I say he's an experienced officer, his promotions had not been, how do I put this, earned through being silly. They'd been earned from doing sensible things. He'd coordinated the evacuation of British and American citizens from Tampico, Mexico, when that city was threatened by rebels. Which, basically, he did that hand in hand with the Rear Admiral Frank Friday Fletcher of the US Navy. And let's be honest, that's one of the coolest names you can be called. Frank Friday Fletcher. And yes, that is the admiral for whom the Fletcher class are named. And he thought, Admiral Fletcher thought, Craddock was very good at his job. Craddock was a Rear Admiral who was due to be promoted. Craddock was an experienced, capable officer. And his other services had included... Oh, good lord. I can get into a list of things, but let's see. He was present with the British occupation of Cyprus. He'd served on the China Station. He took part in the Madeiras War. He took part in the Royal Review at Spithead, Fleet Review at Spithead. Took part in the second stage of the Madras War in 1890. He served on the Royal Yacht Victoria and Albert and published books, Wrinkles in Seamanship, or Help to a Salt Horse. He served as a pallbearer at the funeral of Prince Henry of Battenberg in 1896. He was a... And his last book, by the way, he'd actually published another book before in 1907 called Whispers from the Fleet. His books are... I've forgotten about Whispers from the Fleet. Were fairly capable. And fairly interesting reads. He had been second in command of the Atlantic Fleet for a time in 1911. And he'd actually completed his staff course, even though he'd been very sick and missed 1/3 of the term with kidney troubles, which again is pretty darn good for an admiral this period. So yes, he is not charging in stupidly, but he knows very much what the risks he's running when he goes to do these things. He knows what he's facing, but he's having to do judgment he's having to do. Little Richards, did he die in action? 52, you seem so young. Yep. He died in the Battle of Coronel. With his ship. He's a very good admiral. I know you disagree, but all for Royal connections, very good seaman. I think he's second best Royal Navy has. I'd put him top 5, but that's because the ones I'm ranking in above him are people people who are also very good in this sort of rank, and they include, well, let's put it this way. Oh, brain engage. Oh, they include one of the battle crew, the gentleman in charge of the battle cruiser squadron, which gets sunk at Jutland. Oh, brain dying slowly, a painful death for the most part. Hood. Why couldn't I remember Hood? But no, Hood is very, very good. I would say if I was going to rank the Royal Navy's admirals at this point, I would probably have Hood as my number 2 after Jellicoe, with Craddock at probably number 4. But you're right, he does have all the connections, and he is a very good officer, and the fact that Churchill tries very much to make him a scapegoat, but fails quite spectacularly, is because of his connections. Basically, Churchill tries to blame everything on Craddock for Coronel, and says, if I had been, if I hadn't been so engaged with all the politics, I would have asked more questions of my admiral at sea. But very quickly, the communiques Churchill had been sending out to Craddock suddenly appear everywhere. As if there are lots of people going, no, you were the one sending him these messages, telling him he had to go and engage. And you were sending them through Sturdy. Sound? I'm told sound is working fine. Microphone raiser siren elite. Yes, that's the default sign mixture. Okay, alright. So, what's Craddock's squadron? Craddock is, of course, based in the Falkland Islands, South Atlantic, and he's supposed to block Von Spey if he tries to make it into the Atlantic. He is given Good Hope and Monmouth. Top speed, 23 knots, 1901 ships. Let's see. We have something which is... Good Hope is not exactly the worst vessel in the world. He doesn't always do that, Thomas Van der Velde, but he has a track record of not being the one responsible. Yet there are, again... Let's put it this way. There are people in this world who get it right. There are people in this world who are too eager to take on the blame that should be accrued to others, and there are people in this world who automatically will say everyone else was at fault. I noticed this because I fall in the group which often tries to take blame when it's not my fault, because I have a according to the last time I had to be psych evaled. It happens occasionally. For various jobs I've done in my life, you have to be psych evaled. I have an overly developed sense of protection and guardianship for looking after people. So I tend to feel that if people around me in my team fail, it's because I haven't prepared them properly. Even if really I couldn't have done any more preparation or any more training than I did, I will feel it's my fault. Which can cause just as many problems as trying to spread the blame around. Believe it or not, it can cause just as many problems. Because whilst the person, if you're like that, is seeking to rectify that scenario, that then takes your eye and concentration off other things which are going on, which you need to focus on. Yeah. And basically, yes. The thing was, Craddock is a rear admiral. Craddock cannot argue back with Churchill. If we go back again, this gentleman is a vice admiral and a CNC Australia. He can argue back with you, but he can't leave his area without specific permission because he's in charge of the area. It's a case of the guy who can argue back with you and can go, what the frigging are you trying to tell me to do? He's not able to leave his area because he's a CNC. And this poor guy has the job of dealing with the threat, and you're sending him off with this to deal with the threat, and he can't argue back with you because he's only a rear admiral. there are, yeah, you have to be, you have to try and get the balance right, because you have to be critical enough to work out when it is your fault. Because sometimes it is, and sometimes it's other faults. So that's one reason why I do it myself. I switch into historian mode sometimes when I'm looking at problems when I'm team leader. And I go through it and I'm analysing as if I'm an impartial historian, looking at all the various factors to try and work out. And sometimes, usually or not, it's a shared blame scenario. Only 1640. I know one of those. Slammed the door of my car into a trolley rack, left an open can of soda in the footwell, then kicked it over, all of which was not his fault. Didn't understand why I was mad. So this person departed the current life because, not only don't take this the wrong way, but I can imagine anyone who kicks over a can of drink in your car, it might not be with us anymore. They might have moved on planes of existence, evolved to a new, higher form of being, involuntarily and suddenly. I'll try and stop the yelling too much when I'm excited. Thunderhammer, Iron Hammer. How to rise the heart rate of a streamer. Just type sound. Now, the thing is, this vessel is basically armed with the best killing weapons of the time, the 6-inch guns, when it's built. But the thing is, to use those, it has to get into range. And when it's built in 1901, that's great, but by the time you got to 1914, you have directed fire. And you have potential of long-range engagements. So his long-range engagement capacity is 2 single 9.2-inch guns for his force. These are his armoured cruisers. No, it's the shared blame when you try and say it's a systemic fault, etc. No, sometimes it's usually because people either, sometimes there is not the right process in place, sometimes the process has replaced actual proper communication, which is always a problem with team leadership. If we consider this scenario, we have lots of people trying to communicate, not using the proper process, because the people who should be part of the proper process are busy and distracted doing other things. The person who should be, the politician should be feeding into the First Sea Lord, who should then be sending down what messages need to the other people, because that's what the political head of the Navy does. But when he's busy doing other things, and people are communicating, including the First Lord of the Admiralty, directly with the Chief of Staff, then the Chief of Staff is overwhelmed and is sending out those information to officers. And again, if there's no C&C in place above them who gets those informations and can get some information and can go bye bye or no, or various other rude hand gestures you can think of. It's usually this one is a favoured British one because of course it's our ability to draw our longbows. So we usually use it to wind up the French, but we can use it to wind up each other just as well. All those things as options. If that's not in place, then those proper processes aren't going to take place. There is no one weeding out. Before it gets to Craddock, there is no level which is weeding out the surplus messages, and also it's causing him to get overloaded messages in that he's told these ships are coming and then they're not coming, and he's not told they're not coming because the messages about them not coming is not a priority message, whereas the message that they were coming was a priority message. When you think about it, the bigger priority message is that the vessel's not coming. Because if he doesn't think the fence is on its way, if he doesn't think he's going to get that reinforcement, then he's going to change his options. Melanie, A, my sympathy for you, and B, I think it's very good you got you got him to do that. Frankly, if he, I don't have a car at the moment. As I said, I've got to buy a new car this, and I've got to buy a new to me car this year. Because car issues. But even the hire cars I'm using at the moment, I have been very careful and protective of, and and we all have to love her. My mum, who didn't think about it and would never do this in her own car, allow this in her own car, crumpled up a sweet paper and stuck it in a pocket out of the door and just dropped it in and forgot about it. Got a, excuse me, because you don't do it to a car. You respect a car. Clarke had hoped to have Stoddart Squadron under his command. For that, I need to check up the whole squadron. Let's see. He's in charge. Dreadnought Project. Thank you. Archibald Pellew Stoddart. Another one of those officers who dies in 1939. Fifth Cruiser Squadron. In 1914, that's Carnarvon, Falmouth, Liverpool. Falmouth's a town class. Liverpool's a town class. Carnarvon. Yeah. A Devonshire class armoured cruiser. Well, that helps. Carnarvon, Falmouth, Bristol, Liverpool. It would have been useful to have more town class cruisers. It would have been useful, and Carnarvon would have been useful, but that's not going to change much about it. It's going to give him slightly more firepower, and honestly, it's probably going to induce him to leave certain ships behind, because if he has that many town class cruisers and another armoured cruiser, then he has far more speed mobility to do that. And then he can dictate the pace of the battle. And that's the really important thing. If you can dictate the pace of the battle, you can win it. If people are shocked by political interference having bad impacts on strategy, then blaming the people below, please, done reading David Lloyd George's memoirs. It's not good for blood pressure. No, it's not. It's really not. It gets worse at certain points. So, yes, you can also cause an overload by installing communication systems. Interesting, learning a lot here, Doctor. Yes, learning to communicate is an art. Falklands War is a good example as well, because they don't have a task force commander down in the South Atlantic. One of the things that's often forgotten is Sandy Woodward is not the task force commander South Atlantic. He's task group commander. He's task group the Carrier Battle Group. Then there's Michael Clarke, who's the task group commander of the Amphibious Task Group. Then it starts out Land Forces Task Group is commanded by Brigadier General Thompson, Junior Thompson, who is in charge until the very nice Lieutenant General turns up. and then he takes over the combined forces offshore. They're all task group commanders. The task force commander is back in Naval, because communication systems allow that, so they allow them to run them from home. The trouble is, this means a lot of people try and get involved in communications, and also then you have the other added fun that the special forces brought their own satellite communications gear, so they could do their own direct link back home. And this meant that because the way the Special Forces communication came in at a different level than Task Force, often communicating above Task Force level directly to Ministerial level because of the way Special Forces are run, and were run that time, this would mean that the Task Force commander would be saying, we're going to be doing this thing, and then they'd have to deal with the politicians turning around and go, well, we've heard from this officer and that officer that they're doing this. And he'd be going, and then there'd be actual direct communications going down from ministers to task group commanders trying to give them orders as well. It was a lot of fun. So, yes, the more people less people learn from history, the more they repeat it. Mm-hmm. Metron, the armoured cruiser USS Brooklyn with its 8.8-inch guns mounted in 4 twin turrets on the deck would have been better than HMS Good Hope. The Brooklyn's 5-inch would be swamped, but not the 8 inches. Well, let's quickly just point this out as well. Pretty much the other problem for these ships is that those lower guns will not work in the South Atlantic because the sea is not fine for it, so there's no way they're going to be working. Even the higher level casemate and sponson mounted weapons are going to have issues working, if they work at all, in the South Atlantic. So the only guns viable are really going to be the turrets when they're engaging in the high seas, and it's also the same in the South Pacific on the around the Good Hope area. Because if anyone's ever studied anything around the Good Hope area, and Coronel, extending as high north as Coronel, etc., and others, the seas are not exactly small and are not exactly calm. Then we have Glasgow 25 knots and Otranto 18 knots. Now, up until this point, 23 knots, 25 knots, broadly speaking, the thing is, Craddock could have dictated the distance. The moment you give him Otranto as well, he cannot dictate the distance. Because if he keeps Otranto with him, then he's only able to go maximum of 18 knots, which is going to be slower than this force's roughly 22 knots. Yes, they're going to be decreased by fouling the hull and quality of coal they have, etc., but it's not going to be that bad. Whereas these are starting off from 18 knots. And let's be honest, there's a reason Glasgow gets away. The fact that Otranto gets away is altogether more disturbing on several levels, but she gets away. Well, nice hearing, as we've been over before, there was a force which could beat these things. It was under the command of Patey sitting off Suava. And if you look up the island of Suava, Suva, I mean. Well, you'll find that is a long way away. That's basically, Suva Island is as far as Patey can get without actually crossing out of his zone of command. If he'd gone any further east, he would have been have changed command zones. How's the trying to get away? Darkness. Did I do Monmouth? Well, Monmouth is these, as I did mention, has these all these 6-inch guns, which are a really great idea in 1901 because most of the fighting takes place at 6-inch gun range, and that's where they really dominate. However, by the time you got around to 1914, you have direct-to gunfire. It doesn't work that well. Isn't there like only 2 weeks a year there isn't a storm around Cape Horn? It's not quite that bad, but it's getting close. Icons of drowsiness. At the moment, I will say I'm looking in car-wise, I'm looking at Volvos and Subarus, but I am open to other things. I did get a very nice viewer. Has sent me a very nice message over my academia.edu account, which included links to a dealership which they really recommended up in North England, and I keep meaning to give them a call because they looked really good quality cars and they looked like they did really good work. But I just haven't had a chance with sorting out family and doing all the videos and all the stuff, and I haven't needed a car because I haven't been driving around that much. So when I needed a car, I've just hired one because I needed it for a few days and then not needed it again. There are some good pictures of spaceships surrounding the Horn in bad weather and making almost walking speed. Now, these ships, 8 4.7-inch guns, and yes, that is a merchant liner, and 2 single 6-inch guns, 10 single 4-inch guns, 4 3-pounders, 2 to 18-inch torpedo tubes. Honestly, let's be honest, we talked about this earlier, if Craddock had had 4 of these on his command and a 3rd armoured cruiser, he would have been able to leave this behind somewhere, and his force would have had a top speed of roughly 20. It would have had a speed of 23 knots, which doesn't sound like a lot, but he'd have been more likely to be operating far closer to his top speed of 23 knots than the Germans would have been to their top speed of 22 knots, which would have allowed him to set the distance of battle to an extent. It would have allowed him to keep his distance if he wanted to. He would have. And yes, the car market over here has been crazy, Melanie. I'm hoping that is one of the reasons why I've been waiting for the prices to go down, because it's going to sound strange, but some of the other cars you could get for my price bracket, because usually cars, I tend to want good quality ones, but I also know I do a lot of off-roading and things going around various family members' houses and going up to... Basically, the drives are very, very badly maintained on some of the family farms, and you are literally driving through the hills of Dartmoor. So I like to have a 4-wheel drive, and I like to have it not that expensive because it's going to get mucky as anything, at least, if not beaten up by the actual ground. Yes, there are people, I watch people on various video channels who do off-roading for fun, and I sit there and go, I enjoy off-roading for fun, and I have done the odd rally stage as part of a fun event thing, and I love it. But for me, that's often just driving to some of my family's houses. So, here is what he almost had. He almost had HMS Defence. Now let's put it this way. If Defence had been with him, well, that would have been 4 more 9.2-inch guns, which, let's be honest, represents a whopping, not 100% increase in his 9.2-inch gun firepower, but a 200% increase in his 9.2-inch gunfire, plus at least 10 7.5-inch guns, of which at least 5 could fire in a broadside. Now, what does this whopping increase in firepower give him? Well, if we go back to good old von Spey's squadron, they had 8. So they had 16 8.3-inch guns. Again, easier chance getting the guns which were actually not casemates to fire, but the casemates are high enough. The top level 8-inch guns can tend to work. They're on the higher level, so they will work. So their broadside, between the two of them, this would have been combined 12 8.3-inch guns. So his response would have been 6 9.2-inch guns and 5 7.5-inch guns. That's a lot better than he does have if he just had the fence along. So that would have been 11 big guns firing at 12. And the other advantage of the fence is that she's armed with some of the latest technology in terms of armor for armored cruisers, some of the latest technology in terms of fire control. She's really far better. And then there's Canopus. Now, if she'd been with them, their top speed would still have been 18 knots. If she's working. If she's working and her chief engineer isn't mucking her about. But she's armed with 12-inch guns. And with her 4 12-inch guns, the odds are, if Canopus had been there, von Spey would have looked at the squadron and have thought, I would rather be anywhere else other than fighting you, so I will, instead of using my speed to stalk you and then attack you, I will use my speed to get away from you. And as Paul from Chicago pointed out, the fence also had more freeboard, so her guns would work. Yes, all her guns, please notice, are turret mounted. They're all higher. 4.7-inch is 120mm, yeah. So, these are interesting ships. However, defense, as I've talked about, was supposed to be sending the Clarke, then was ordered to go back to Mediterranean in case of Goeben and Breslau trying to get out of the Mediterranean, then is ordered to go to form a new squadron off the coast of South America, just in case von Spey gets past Clarke. In which case, by the way, in this squadron for this point, if von Spey had got past Clarke and managed to keep straight going, he would have found the fence on her own. Now, the fence is very good, but on her own, she ain't taking on the whole of von Spey's squadron. And that would have been a very powerful unit to lose under those circumstances. It's let's put it this way. That would have looked possibly even worse. Because he'd have dodged one squadron and then destroyed a ship in another squadron. Now, Craddock goes out, expecting this thing to be hunting him down from behind. Which he can do. Because she has a top speed of 23.5 knots. Roughly. Now, 23.5 knots, she should be able to catch him up. And you're right, von Spey did get through. Well, he destroyed the squadron. But the thing was, he got so much damage he had to pull back. And the point was him slipping past. And he wouldn't have slipped past if defense had actually been there. This is the point. Defense had been there. Exactly, Melanie. Canopus The interesting thing is there's an interesting scenario. Someone asked me to work out and look in through and think through Craddock's thought process. What would have happened if he'd got Stoddart's squadron, all the potential reinforcements he's supposed to get? If Canopus had been working, defense had arrived on Stoddart's squadron. Well, that would have given him 4 town-class cruisers and 4 armoured cruisers, for starters. And Canopus and Otranto. So in nicest way, Canopus and Otranto probably spend their time are left down at the Falkland Islands, back at the Falkland Islands, because they're only capable of 18 knots. And you could leave them at Falklands Islands and they will secure the Falkland Islands. Much has happened anyway. And then you go forward. And you go forward at roughly 23 knots. And with 4 armoured cruisers and 4 town-class light cruisers, there is nothing left of the von Spee squadron after battle is engaged. Because von Spee can't run away, and von Spee won't win that fight. Because you will then be dealing with... Well, let's be honest, you'd have 2 more 9.2-inch guns. Or was it 4 more 9.2-inch guns? Carnarvon... Devonshire class. She has 4 7.5-inch guns in single turrets. So she'd have given him 4 more 7.5-inch guns. So that would have been 8 7.5-inch guns and 6 9.2-inch guns at range, engaging the Germans' fleet if they wanted to do a long-range fight. If that's what Craddock chose. Eight plus 6, 14 versus 12 8.3-inch guns. That's going to be an interesting fight, but also then they have the speed they can probably close if they want to, when they want to close it. I'm seeing Canopus, not the fence. The fence is one of the Minotaur class armor cruisers. I've got Canopus, I've got a picture of here. And so I've got her details listed here. But the fence, I wanted to show more detail on that, so I found the plan from Brassey's. And I used the Brassey's plan, but the Brassey's plan comes with details below it. So rather than just copy out Brassey's, which I would have pretty much done, and add in the details, I just went, right, I'll just leave that there. I'll be honest, basic lesson I'm learning from this is if you want to hunt enemy trade interdiction forces, you have to have more towns and more battle cruisers. Which explains World War II are in thinking. Yeah. Canopus didn't blow up. If I remember correctly, HMS Defence... She sunk at the Battle of Jutland. Basically, she sunk at the Battle of Jutland, which is a battle she really wasn't, by that point, it shouldn't have been in. But she would have been very good at the Battle of Coronel. Hi, Dan. Dan, it's 10 o'clock. 5 o'clock finish, getting home from work now means you were doing a lot more than playing catch-up. And Canopus had engine issues. Honestly, that's an entire different line of communication. And basically, while Canopus was trying to fix itself, Craddock had also, on the 22nd of October, had cabled the Admiralty that he was going to round Cape Horn and leaving Canopus behind to escort his colliers. Fisher, well, as said, replaces Battenberg on the 27th of October. And then he orders... Well, then he starts trying to become First Sea Lord and do all the orders again. But by that point, there's all sorts of issues going on. And the biggest issues are caused by this. Right, the pursuit of the Goeben. Admiral Sir Ernest Thomas Trowbridge had been Ernest Charles Thomas Trowbridge had been in charge. Goeben is pursued. Churchill orders them to engage. They do not manage to engage because they can't do. They are outgunned, out. Basically, he's fast them. Those are the British ships being pictured here behind her. They are sometimes in engagement range, sometimes not, but never close enough to actually get a decisive hit. They're trying their best, but they're not getting close enough. And because of this perceived failure to engage, Trowbridge never gets another seagoing command. Trowbridge does his best. He tries to follow his orders. And he's, again, a fairly decent admiral the Royal Navy had at the time. There are better admirals. He's not... I would say Craddock is better than him, but he is not a bad admiral. But he cannot catch the Goeben. And this is the thing. Every naval officer knows what's happened to Trowbridge. Everyone knows what happens to Trowbridge. They know he is. They know that he intends to engage them despite being outclassed, but his flag captain and others encourage him not to. Basically say it's going to be suicide, so he doesn't. And this allows them to escape. And the thing falls on Trowbridge, and he's court-martialed. So Trowbridge is let down by everyone. And what's the really cruel thing is, when he's being court-martialed, those very same officers that encouraged him to not go to decisive action, to not try and pursue that, because he would get turn on him and put the blame on him. He's in charge. We were just offering opinions. We were just offering advice. He has the final say. He's the admiral. You, us. Excuse me in French. And, okay, this is... Well, I'm going to do this because it's always a fun story. One of the things that comes up with Trowbridge quite often is the fact that his second wife, Margot Elena Gertrude Taylor, a sculptor, actually leaves him to begin a relationship with Marguerite Radcliffe Hall. So, again... When people try and say such relationships and such things are new to the world, they've been around a long, long time. And they even touched this story. This history. So to run up to the battle. Well, it's a absolute muck-up, okay? Fisher replaces, as I mentioned, Battenberg on the 27th of October. And then Fisher orders Craddock not to engage Spey without Canopus. This is 5 days after Canopus has cabled the Admiralty telling them he's going around to Cape Horn and is leaving Canopus behind to escort his colliers. At this point, Fisher again orders Defence, who must at this point be the crew are feeling a bit dizzy, go and reinforce Craddock. At which point, defense are going, yes, we're off! The Craddock! Craddock, in turn, sends Glasgow to Coronel to try and pick up any messages the Admiralty might have sent. So, because of the bad the quality of communications down to the South Atlantic, Craddock sends Glasgow's town-class cruiser to Coronel to try and establish a line of communications with the Admiralty to get the information by telegram, or as securely as it can, to they need in order to find out what's going on. Von Spey learns that Glasgow is present off Coronel. He was currently at that point at Valparaiso, with all his ships. Now, this is where Spey starts the thing which ultimately leads to his downfall. Because he hears there's a British ship solo in Coronel. And so he decides he's going to sail south with everything to destroy her. Okay, not exactly on your route of march, but I can understand why, because let's be honest, with her speed, etc., Glasgow could have found him and could have shadowed him, which is another reason to actually avoid her, and report in their position to other British forces to call them in. That is what we'd have actually hoped. Now, Craddock, at this point, has received another message which comes through to him, which tells him his force is sufficient to deal with Von Spey. This is a problem, because who else had been told his forces were sufficient? Oh. Trowbridge. Ouch. And under those circumstances, describing as constitutionally incapable of refusing action is probably fair. Because for someone of his generation, for someone who's steeped in the Royal Navy as he is, the honour of the Royal Navy, if he has been told his forces are sufficient to engage Von Spey, and he was going to try and think it through himself to do so, if he backs down without fighting Von Spey, or he doesn't do the necessary thing, he doesn't try to find him and fight him, then he is dishonouring the Royal Navy. He won't do that. There's also another thing which you should note. Glasgow intercepts radio traffic from one of the German cruisers and tells Craddock that there's only a single German cruiser. So let's put it this way. Both the Germans are sailing south thinking they're only going to find a single cruiser, and Craddock is sailing north thinking he's only going to find a single cruiser. So you can say that, yes, he should have avoided action, but he didn't think he was. He didn't think he wasn't going to engage, according to his information, the whole German fleet. It's a possibility, it's always a possibility. But let's be honest, as a rule, the Germans tend to be all communicating on radios at full blast. The fact that he's against the only squadron which seems to exercise a modicum of actual radio control discipline, it's just bad luck. In the entire history of the German Navy in World War I and World War II, there is it's incredibly rare that a squadron or any of their ships actually operate in anything like a sensible radio discipline. I.e., their radios, whenever they transmit them, and they transmit quite frequently, is transmitted on full volume at full power. At no point do they go, hang on, do we need to be full power for this? Or what? All the other things. Other than Von Spade's squadron. They're the only ones which manage this feat. The only ones. My coach, if Von Spee was at Valparaiso, did the British consul there try and telegraph news home or try and tell Craddock? Information was tried to be got around, but unfortunately the information got to the Foreign Office and the Admiralty and took time getting to Craddock. So, both sides think they're going to encounter a single ship. So you can sort of understand both admirals' logic. For Von Spee, killing a British ship is going to be good status for getting home, but also it's going to cause a lot of British forces to try and descend on that area, and that means he could do the namesake ship would do in World War II, which is make a kill and then go off to a completely different area, while everyone else is drawn into that area to allow them to get past. And Craddock is trying to take out a single ship because his chance is to try and defeat the German fleet in small numbers. I.e., if he can take out a single ship on its own, if he can find even a single armoured cruiser, any single ship of the German fleet on its own, then his force has a chance of winning. Has a chance. It's the usual problem, leading to people dying. Intelligence communications failures. It's often not the intelligence communications guy's faults. When it happens though, bad stuff happens. Yeah. So. Here is the thing. Both sides are still expecting only to fight a single ship until roughly 20 to 5 on the 1st of November. 1914. So, again, when we talk about that, when I was talking about HMAS Australia and her ability to get there, it's late on the 1st of November. So let's say if she did take 20 days and she did leave on the 12th, well, she could arrive quite late on the 1st of November down there and she could make it. This is the really sad point here. That timeline would have worked if, I don't know, if anyone had been in charge differently, had been thinking on the, even if they'd said to Patey, you can't go, but your battle cruiser can go, send your flagship and you go to transfer to a different ship, he'd probably accepted, and his flagship could have gone under his flag captain at Australia and gone off and done the job. But they wouldn't let him do that. Tom's Vanderbilt, I agree it's a little bit more complex than just full power or not, but I will be talking about that in the year of technology when we get to communications. The German ships were also all using the same call sign, that of Leipzig's. So Admiral Craddock thought he was going to catch the Leipzig. Now let's go and think about the Leipzig. The Leipzig is that baby here. The really, really weak and slow one of the light cruisers on Von Spee. Wouldn't you want to take it out? And so both sides think they're hunting a weak prey. At 09:15 hours, well, Glasgow leaves port to meet Craddock, aiming for meeting him by 1200 hours. 40 miles west of Coronel. That's 34.8 nautical miles. Seas were so rough, it was impossible to send a boat between the ships to deliver messages, so they had to be transferred on a line floated in the sea. At 13:05 hours, the ships formed into a line abreast formation, 15 miles apart, Glasgow at the eastern end, and was steaming north at 10 knots, searching for Leipzig. Coincidentally, at 16:17 hours, Leipzig, accompanied by the other German ships, spots smoke from the line of British ships. Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Leipzig managed to go to full speed, which was 20 knots. Again, think about this. The German operating speed by this point, top speed, was 20 knots. So again, if we go back to this thing, it would have crucified them. If Craddock had been able to have defence and not Otranto, he could probably have crucified them, because he could have had a 2 to 3 knot advantage in every single way. And the fact is, the Dresden Nuremberg are actually managing less than 20 knots. They're not able to go to full speed. In Morrison, would they send a battlecruiser unescorted? They would in the Pacific. They did, yes, they've done that deliberately. It is one of the biggest sins in Radioland, but they're all using Leipzig as part of the effort. As said, this is why I say von Spee might not be the best admiral of all time, but he's certainly one of the smarter ones the Germans had, and we can all be very thankful to for the British that he doesn't get back to Germany. Because, you know, someone who's able to think, well, let's play some radio tricks on the British. Just imagine the problems he could have caused in Room 40. Now, we have the battle. And this is where you get the real problems. Because here is the thing. This is where people get discussions of, well, why didn't Craddock just abandon Otranto? He could have. Could have got away if he'd abandoned Otranto, because all his ships could do faster than 20 knots. That's true. But then he'd have had to abandon a ship to its fate which he'd led there. And yes, you are right. That risks the lives and loses the lives ultimately of his two armour crews and far more than the crew of Otranto. But I think his plan was to try and hold the Germans off till nightfall and then use the darkness to escape. And he gets ever so close to that. A little bit of luck and he might have achieved it. And again, we could be talking about a different battle. A little bit of luck. So, At 16:20 hours, Glasgow and Otranto saw smoke to the north. And then they see 3 ships at a range of 12 miles. That's 10 nautical miles. The British reverse direction, so both fleets are moving south. The chase begins. This lasts 90 minutes. Otranto at this point can only manage 16 knots. She's a top speed theoretically of 18 knots at this point. She's only managing 16 knots in this water. And he could try and order Otranto to Coronel, but if he divides off, he risks the Germans all going after her. Let's be honest. What would you rate her chance if she can only do 16 knots and has 8 4.7-inch guns against any of these German ships? And let's be honest, it would be a light cruiser to be sent after her. Probably one of the 2 slower ones, which were actually Dresden or Nuremberg at this point. Not high. At 17:10, Craddock, we're not sure what he does. Okay, right? This is the point. We don't know what Craddock's thinking. We don't know what his discussions with his admirals, with his flag captains are, etc. We only know the orders he gives to Glasgow and Otranto and what he's observed doing. We don't have any of his discussions. What we know is at 5:10 at 17:10 hours, after the Germans have slowed to maintain a range of 15,000 yards, when the British would be outlined by the setting sun, Craddock knew that if he's going to be outlined against the setting sun, he is going to be absolutely at a disadvantage. There is no way he can deal that scenario. So he draws his ships closer together, he changes course to the southeast, and attempts to close upon the German ships while the sun remains high, while he still has a chance to fight them. And to push them back. If he can get them to withdraw, that could then buy him time. This is the point. This has to be something also going through his mind, because if he can give himself distance, he gives himself time. If he gives himself time, he can get away into the darkness. So he's either engaging from the point of view of it's his only chance to actually fight this one and have a chance of winning, or he's engaging because it's his only chance to drive them back a bit so he can actually have the distance to get to safety. Either way, it's his only real option. It's not a constitutionally unable to not engage. It's constitutionally that's the only real option he has. He does this again at 18:18 hours, steering directly towards them. Spey declined that time, and he declined the previous time. At 18:15 hours, as the sun set, and as they were illuminated against this western sun, this setting sun, and they're really able to be viewed by the Germans, that is when Spey closes to 12,000 yards and commences firing. (16.21 centimeter). That's 8-point-something inch guns, 8.3 inch guns, versus 2 9.2 inch guns on Good Hope, of which what can actually fire probably, honestly, about 8 of the German ones could fire if we look at their positioning, but it's 1, possibly 2 of Good Hope. It doesn't really make much of a difference whether it's 16 versus 2 or 8 versus 2. It's still a massive, massive overwhelming. At the same point, the casemates on the British ships are flooded. The 6-inch guns, they have insufficient range. And to say that, though, Glasgow gives a good account of herself. Glasgow, with her guns, starts to really rack it up amongst the German light cruisers. One of the things often forgotten about this battle is Glasgow basically goes harry-carry as much as she can on the German light cruisers within the limits of her capability. He had been told earlier that his force was sufficient to engage Spey. But that doesn't mean, nicest way, Craddock is as able to read a copy of Jane's and Brassey's as Spey as and anyone else's. He knows what the reality of his force is. And he does read them. This is the point I try and make about Craddock. He writes books. He researches and writes books. He's not an unthinking fool. He reads, he researches, he studies. He knows what his threat is. He knows what he's facing. Craddock again attempts to close on the German ships. After all, they're trying to close in on him. By 7:30 hours, that's 1930 hours, he reached 6,000 yards. But unfortunately, because he's coming in from the west, he's got the sun the last dying suns, really highlighting his position, whilst it obscures the German position for him. And both Good Hope and Monmouth catch fire, which makes them even easier targets for the German gunners. Monmouth is silenced first. Good Hope continues firing, trying to close. Good Hope, of course, is Craddock's own ship. At 1950 hours, she ceases firing, and then her forward section explodes. She breaks apart and sinks. We're not sure quite when. No one really witnesses it. No survivors. Then Charnor switches her fire to Monmouth, while Gneisenau has to go back up Leipzig and Dresden because they've been being beaten up by Glasgow. Captain John Luce, it's Luce, isn't it? L-U-C-E, Luce. He calls it. I will sometimes call it Luca because there's not. Basically, there was a friend at school who was spelt his name L-U-C-E and always called it Luca. And I know Glasgow's captain is Luce, but brain always wants to say Luca. Decided that nothing would be gained by staying and attempting to fight. And noticing that each time he fired, the flash of his guns were used by the Germans to aim a new salvo, also ceased firing, and then managed to disappear. With one compartment of the ship flooded, she could still manage 24 knots. He first tried to make it a Monmouth, which was dark but still afloat. Nothing was done to be done for the ship, and that was sinking slowly, but was attempting to try and beach on the Chilean coast, and so Glasgow turned south to depart. Nuremberg spotted Monmouth. She'd arrived slurred in other German ships, and she directed her searchlights at the ship's ensign, which was an invitation for them to surrender. They didn't accept this. They didn't surrender. And she's sinking. She's already listing and badly damaged, but still moving. So Nuremberg, after offering Monmouth the chance to surrender, decides to open fire and sink the ship. Yeah. This is going to sound terrible, but when a ship's already sinking like that, and it's not going to be come back, I don't like the idea of just engaging it. You are literally just shooting it for the sake of saying you sunk it rather than it's gone. It's already out of the action. It's not coming back. There's nothing to be gained. In fact, you could argue there's more to be gained from not sinking it, because the British efforts that would have to have gone into sending support and succour to find this crew, get the ship back, or recover the ship or deal with it in Coronel, etc., would have been seen all over the world, would have been a massive thing against British. It's a lot of issues, and it would have caused a lot of problems for the British. But instead you've sunk it. So basically, yes, you offer them a chance to surrender, so that can sap your conscience, so you can claim you haven't just murdered them, but they can't fire back. They're sinking, they're listing, they're obviously badly damaged. It's not technically murder, because it's war and because they haven't agreed to surrender when you gave them the chance, but it's so close it kind of stinks. It does. And I say that about anyone who does it. Why didn't they surrender? Well, there's two possible reasons. One, they couldn't surrender because of the fire and damage. They couldn't actually reach the stern to take the flag down. And two, tradition. They're not going to surrender. They're the Royal Navy. It's HMS Monmouth, it's not a wounded tiger. I'll follow the sun, so sinking the Bismarck stinks. Yeah, to an extent. But there again, there is a small problem with the Bismarck. You see, the Bismarck scenario, there is actual reinforcements coming to the Bismarck in the case of aircraft and submarines. There are no reinforcements really coming to that ship. And it's, to an extent, it's daylight, and it's actually closer to able to get home. There is no chance of Monmouth getting home. The closest she can get to is Chile if she gets to a beach. Bismarck is heading for German-controlled French territory. There is a chance of her getting home, and was still shooting back, as Stradling has put out that. So that doesn't really stink as much. There is issues, but they're not the same issues as this one. And don't take a strong way, I'll follow the sun. But that point kind of stinks about of whataboutism. I've talked about this with lots of ships over the time, and I've said in my view on when it happens, it's not right. When you do, there are times when you have to do it. There are times when you have to do it, and there are ships which will blow up, etc. And this is the scenario. But in the case of Monmouth, in this scenario, it's not really. And honestly, to be honest, I find it almost annoying that it's Nuremberg that does it, because Nuremberg hasn't been in the fight. If it had been one of the ships which had actually been fighting Monmouth and still fighting them, etc., got their blood up and doing all that stuff, I can sort of, to an extent, more easily excuse that. But Nuremberg hadn't been involved in the fighting. They literally come in at the end, demand surrender, and then sink a ship which won't fire back. And the comparisons don't, as I said, fit well. every scenario has its own situation. Shooting back puts into a completely different scenario. Yes, it does. It does mean they're actually still fighting back, whereas Monmouth isn't. But there is also the point that let's be honest, Bismarck being finished off, she was never going to be allowed to get away. And that's the point which does make it does sort of put a thing in. Because yes, there are legitimate reasons for the British to do what they do with Bismarck. But there's also the fact that because of what happened with Hood, which is a lucky shot, I will say, in my view, looking at where... Because getting that one shot is... You're not aiming that shot. You're not... You're aiming that shot at Hood. Where it actually hits on Hood is luck. It's the fault of ballistics and all these things going through, but it is luck. But because they sunk Hood, basically the British are out for vengeance, so there is no way Bismarck is getting away. Which is the only reason which makes it an issue, to an extent, in how they handled it. But with Monmouth, yeah. Scharnhorst is still firing, but the, honestly, Scharnhorst is taken out far too quickly for her to do anything else. North Cape is not a good scenario. North Cape is not a good scenario for Scharnhorst, and her destroyers are not really anywhere near engaged to engage or help out. That's part of the trouble with North Cape for them. They have got, again, North Cape, Bismarck, all these scenarios stem that to the lack of decent light cruisers. Richard, that is War Thunder, not war. Yeah, I do understand what you're saying. In War Thunder and most of these games, you have ways of healing yourself magically. And yes, with Bismarck there are, as I mentioned, U-boats and aircraft coming to assist her. And actually, the reason they do what they do with her finishing off quickly is they think they spot a U-boats in the water, and frankly the Royal Navy aren't going to hang around for Bismarck to properly Bismarck to actually decide that she's going to lose and surrender, and stop trying to fight back, if there are going to be submarines taking taking torpedo shots at them and possibly cost them a load of ships. They'll just sink her. I think 5 minutes survival time in the water is generous for Scharnhorst crew in North Cape. It certainly wasn't the Mediterranean, which was turned out to be so warm that some of the personnel from one of the cruisers at the point when they went in, for British cruisers, thought they had gone into a bath. So what is it about Monmouth and Drake class armor cruisers that give no chance for any survivors? They really are not that well prepared for war. They really aren't prepared for this kind of wars. They're just not. Anyway, the aftermath. Well, Spey's won. Richards. Ship didn't have a full 45-second damage repair. Oh dear, that's a much different fight. I know. But the reason I did make that point, Richards, and please note it, is because I've actually had this discussion with some people who should know better, which might colour my view of politicians, because they are politicians, elected representatives, who actually do think ships can pretty much heal themselves, like in, well, one was, but surely ships can repair themselves at sea, just like they do in, what was it? It wasn't War Thunder, it's the other one they used. Not them. I do Armature Admirals from them, and it's not that one. It was the other one. are really a science fiction space game. Spaceships. Oh, the Star Trek one, Starfleet Command. Star Trek Command? I'm not sure. Anyway, that one where apparently they can repair themselves. They're going, oh, surely we can repair. Not World of Warships. It just. So I always make sure I answer the questions and go, no, it doesn't. Just in case anyone watches and go, but you said it could, or you joked it could. Yeah, no. Dash Rochelle, if you talk to senior officers from ships, they often tell you the end of a lot of naval battles could be described as murder, as the enemy will often be out of combat ability long before sinking. Yes and no. It depends on the battles you're talking about. It depends on the battles you're talking about. When in Age of Sail, it can be interesting because the ships can still retain combat ability for quite a long time and before they sink. And especially with wooden hull, you can repair it and keep it going. So, yes, then you storm the ship and you demand their surrender and you basically take over their top deck. It's a rule. Once you get it reach this sort of period, well, the firepower you're dealing with once you're engaging the larger vessel guns, the 8.3 inch, the 9.2 inch, the 12 inch guns, the sheer explosive power they can have, even the 6 inch guns, once you're shredding a ship. Yeah, that's not really giving them much choice. And to be fair, you can argue that Bismarck should have probably surrendered, if we're talking about that. Should have probably surrendered the moment she realised she was surrounded by multiple tribals and couldn't get away. That's arguably the moment at which she should have surrendered to save her crew, because there are going to be battleships. You know there are going to be battleships turning up the next day. You have gone from being tailed by a cruiser to being surrounded by destroyers all night. That tells you something nasty is coming the next day. And the next day turns up Rodney and King George V to go, hello, have you met our firepower? The result for Von Spey is that he wins the battle, but then he has to spend his time repairing. Not much, but mostly to his light cruisers because of what Glasgow did to them. This is the joke of the battle. If it had just been down to his armoured cruisers, he could have probably kept going. He could have refueled and kept going and made it maybe have got past the Falklands before the British managed to turn up. But what turns up in the Falkland Islands? Well, two sisters of HMAS Australia. And they're sent under Doveton Sturdy, because Churchill wants to give him a chance to redeem himself, because basically Churchill knows he's still either redeem himself or die, but redeem himself because that's kind of also another classic Churchill move to try and secure an ally who's going to help you put the blame on the dead person, because it's going to burnish their career to say so. But luckily Sturdy is more honourable than that. And Sturdy goes south with these two battlecruisers. He's refueling in the Falkland Islands as the armoured cruisers come close. There's a whole debate within Von Spey's fleet as to whether or not to engage the Falklands or just try and get it past. People debate as to if they got past whether they could have survived. I don't think they could have. I think at the speeds they were capable of, by this point they were going past the Falkland Islands, there is no way they managed to get away from these things once they're spotted. If they managed to keep out of distance, out of range at which their smoke would have been spotted from the Falkland Islands, they'd have had to swing far into the Atlantic, far into the South Atlantic. And that might have got them past, but where that would have gotten to, we can't be quite sure, because there's one good thing of Sturdy's original deployments was that a lot of those spaces, which is the German Empire, are covered by ships and are actually at this point in the process of being conquered or invaded or generally broken up by the Allies. It's not good to be a German colony at this point. And so there's not really sure where he can get to. And so, unfortunately, he finds Canopus's guns, which if they'd been present at Coronel probably would have meant Coronel wouldn't have happened, because he'd have wanted to keep away from those 12-inch guns. Then he tries to engage. He decides he's going to try and take out the communication systems at the Falkland Islands. Unfortunately, he gets what Canopus has done while it's stuck in the Falklands trying to repair itself. Is it set up a load of spotting stations to spot and aim its guns. So it's firing its guns over the Falkland Islands to attack the targets at long range. Well, of course, they can't see where it's firing from. They don't have radars to spot the full shot or direction of fire and fire back down the bearing. They have no capability to do that. So they can't see what's firing them to engage. So they can't engage Canopus at all. So they go as try to run away. This gives time for the Royal Navy battle cruisers to get themselves ready, charge out after them, and hunt them down. And that's exactly what happens. We have Invincible and Inflexible, along with Carnarvon, which is another one of those potential reinforcements. And, well, let's put it this way. If you're going down to 10,000 yards... Well, is it 10,000 yards or meters? I forget what this is. It's 10,000 meters. Yeah. So that's... Let's see... 3 feet is a yard. 3 meter, that's roughly 90 centimeters. I'm doing the maths in my head. $10,000 meters, 10,000 yards plus. Well, not. That is going to be well within point blank range for 12-inch guns. Pretty much. So, kind of as what would have happened if Patey had got his way and been able to take this vessel to go hunting after him. Von Spey ends up facing a battle cruiser, and it's the battle which these ships were designed for, especially the first generation battle cruisers. They are designed to go around the world hunting up armoured cruisers and sinking them. And that's what they do. Star Trek Online. Yes, that's it. Ships in EVE Online also get back to 100 quite rapidly, especially with logistic ships. In starting, ships can affect SOE repair at sea, which is what World Warships are trying to replicate. But you cannot print yourself a new battleship like Conqueror. That's it. Did Von Spey realise that by sinking Monmouth and Good Hope, killing everyone aboard both, the Royal Navy would do to him what they did to Bismarck years later? By that, hunt him like a dog and not stop to show no mercy. Not really, because to him that was just the cost of war. And to be honest, the British do not do it the same as with Bismarck and Hood. That is a bit of a rare thing, and these ships are not... It's a professional duty to sink Von Spey's squadron. It's not hunting him like that. You have to remember the loss of Hood was a massive shock to the Royal Navy. in this period, I can't really equate it the same. There's no ship which really has the same status in the Royal Navy as Hood will build up over her 20 years of service. You have to remember Hood was the biggest ship in the Royal Navy for those 20 years. It's one of those reasons why I think the world changes quite so much if you have the other Admiral class completed as aircraft carriers for the Royal Navy. Hood wouldn't be the sole biggest ship in the Royal Navy. She'd be the biggest capital ship, but not just sole biggest ship. And that would change the thing. And she was the biggest ship in the world as well. She wasn't just the biggest ship in the Royal Navy, the biggest ship in the world. I mean, the thing is, you try and murder them before you murder you. You try and take them out before... Yes, I know that's using a phraseology. You take them out before they take you out, while they're still fighting and capable. Yeah. Clarke, you get idiots everywhere, just unfortunately you find them in relatively high office as well. Mm-hmm. Except... again... I'll follow the sun. You've put Bismarck's admiral sent all his surviving men to death by staying in the fight. Impossible and responsible, not what he should have done. The trouble is, national prestige, national honour, and to an extent, what would have happened to his family under a totalitarian dictatorship if he didn't. All these things are factors. Although, to be fair for him, he seems to be rather focused on the honour and glory of the dictator, so, yeah. Don't know, would any Royal Navy battleship have surrendered Bismarck's place, US-Japan Act? Probably not. They wouldn't have. But that still doesn't mean that that's the point at which you could surrender. Let's put it this way. The point you can surrender is before you start engaging other battleships. Or when they come about. And the thing is, if you're a sole ship on your own, surrounded, that's different than if you're a fleet scenario. But, yes, they probably wouldn't surrender either. They'd still fight on, because that's what they focus on. If I was in that scenario, my crew would probably still expect ourselves to fight on. Because that is what you do. You are the Royal Navy. You are the Kriegsmarine. You are the Kaiserlich Marine. You are the Imperial Japanese Navy. You are... I'm trying to remember how to pronounce that in Japanese. You are the US Navy. You do not do that. You do not surrender. You fight on because that's the honor of your nation. And it still would come up today. That doesn't mean that there's never not a point at which you can surrender. You just won't. It was the biggest capital ship overall in size. It was the biggest one which had been built, and it was the biggest. It was considered it was the biggest in the world officially. Yeah, well, that's the problem. They must get past the Mediterranean fleet if they escape the South Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, and there's also the Channel Squadron, and that has HMS Dreadnought in. Or they can go and try and get past the Grand Fleet. Either way, they're going to have fun. Is the Grass Bay the most successful case, most survivors, where a modern ship has crew has found themselves in an unwinnable situation, evacuated and scuttled the ship? Pretty much. It's the only one where I think the entirety of the crew which are still alive after the battle managed to survive. other than those who take their own lives. Yeah, US battleship captain told his men, "Don't cheer, boys, those poor are dying." That's Battle San Diego. That's true. It's also one of the other things. Yes, the British sank the Bismarck, but immediately they started operations to try and recover people. That's the thing. Immediately, and they only ended those operations because of the submarines. The British sank the Bismarck, then they started operations to try and recover the crew, to try and save the crew. What I find interesting is, well, let's put it this way. There are no survivors from Monmouth. Now, you open fire, you finally sink the ship. Monmouth is not described in her death throes as blowing up. She sinks the ship. The ship sinks. Which suggests to me there should be some survivors somewhere in the water. There might not be. They might have all been trapped below decks, unable to get up. That is a possibility. So I'm not going to say for certain yes or no if anyone got onto the surface. But the fact is, no one survives. I would be tempted to ask, and I would question whether anyone looked. But I'm sure they must have done. It's just I can't find any account of it, and as said, no one survives and yet she sinks. We know Good Hope blows up, so we don't expect any survivors from her. But Monmouth sinks. And I would expect one or two survivors. I would expect. But there again, the South Atlantic is vicious, so there are lots of reasons for that possibly not being the case. I'll follow this on. In the Age of War, there are many... In the Age of War, pre-modern times, in Total War, there are less accounts of... In the Age of Sail, there are many accounts of surrender. In modern times, there's not. Is that what Total War does? Basically, it's the timing. It's the speeding up of the conflict. You see, if you're dealing with the sheer firepower you're dealing with can take you from sinking to blown up in so quickly, you don't have time to surrender. Whereas if you think about the Age of Sail, to sink a wooden ship with the technology you have at the time is actually quite hard. To damage a wooden ship to which a point at which it can't fight is relatively easy, and then honour is satisfied and they can surrender. Colin Cameron, the sinking of the Hood would be roughly the equivalent of its diesel sub using live torpedoes when it infiltrated the US carrier group in the exercise as far as sensation goes. Yep. My coach, Massey saves one space fired off 50% of his ammo at Coronel, then fired off more at Coronel, so even if he got a lucky break, disappear and fall back and escape, he'd be killed next battle. Yep. He was never going to run it. Never going to make it under those circumstances. I've never found any record of any space ships attempting rescue. They cited the sea state as preventing it. Yeah, the sea state was rough. And I again like you, but that, as said, searching for people in dark and rough seas, it's not easy, no, but you have searchlights in things, you at least try it. Yeah. There are many... I do sometimes wonder whether that reason is described afterwards. Is added in sort of afterwards as backwards for why they didn't find anyone. The sea states is a good reason for why you didn't find anyone. But using as an excuse for not looking is something I find a bit I wonder if there's been a... I would hope, because of the fraternity of the sea and the way things work, the rule is you look. Even if you don't think you can find anyone, and even if you think it's going to be an impossible task, you still look. So not looking is a big thing. That then does push what happened to Monmouth definitely across the pale. No, no survivors were picked up. Colin Cameron, no survivors were picked up. And then this is the British streaming out for the Battle of Falkland Islands, 1914. If we consider the British, after the Battle of Falkland Islands, rescued 215. Most survivors came from Gneisenau, 9 from Nuremberg, 18 from Leipzig. Scharnhorst is lost with all hands. And one of the officers of Gneisenau who survived was the sole survivor of 3 different guns from that battered cruiser. And he was when he was pulled from the water, he said he was a first cousin of Stoddart, who was one of the commanders aboard the British ship. Dresden, which managed to roam around for 3 months before a captain, is cornered by Kent, Glasgow, and Orama. In the Battle of Massatia. Have you touched on the impact of weather on the day of the Falkland Battle? Not really, because this is more about the Battle of Coronel. But yes, there was exceptional visibility on the day of the Falklands Battle, which did help. I think I've done a video on the Battle of the Falklands Islands in 1914, which I think I discussed all that. Let me just check. If I haven't, I will bring it up as an example at some point. Search my own channel, YouTube Studio, Battle of the Falklands. No, I haven't. I meant to do one, but I haven't. So, Battle of Coronel. There are so many factors which lead to it. There are so many different context issues going on that play out that, frankly, it would never happen again, but there again, it probably will happen again. It's the reality. You will have a scenario like this happen again. Hello, Bob Fry. TGIF, yes, thank God it's Friday. Yes, there was. When Can I Fit in a Falklands video did go through my brain. Who knows? I might fit in a Falklands video at some point. I will do at some point. But this is a battle which, frankly, in terms of Coronel, I always go back to, at its end point, it happens because both fleets are hunting for a single enemy cruiser. The Germans, because Glasgow has been sent north to try and get communications with the Admiralty working, and to appraise them of the situation whilst also getting the information from them, which arrives with an all the information that by the time, if you consider, if you're getting all the information that the Admiralty sent to you, and you're trying to get all the mail and all the stuff together, and you get it aboard ship at 10 to 2 on the 1st of November, that gives you a maximum of 2 hours to distill that information, try and change directions and all sorts of things. It's going to take a while for you to work through all the information. So, yeah, that's not going to save much, is it? Whereas, so the Germans are hunting this one cruiser, Glasgow, and because of von Spee doing the clever trick of making everyone in his force Leipzig, the British are hunting a single cruiser because according to their radio instruments, there's only a single cruiser up there. There is Leipzig, talking to Leipzig. Let's put it this way. The exact context, the exact scenario of this will probably never happen again. However, scenarios which will rhyme with this will happen again, more than likely. Take care, Thomas Van der Velde. I'm not going to go on for much longer because I have been up for a long time today. It is now nearly 11 o'clock and I promised my family I'd be done by 10. Oh. So, I'm going to say any last questions, and then I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone for being part of this. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found it interesting. And I've tried to give you as much of the context and nuance. I know I didn't focus in on the battle much. I talked more about the context and nuance, but that's because there are many channels which will give you a blow-by-blow of the battle. There are many good accounts you can find out there which are blow-by-blow accounts of battle. The more difficult thing I tend to find with these things is finding the context and nuance of them. And I have to admit, talking about the things that are coming up this year, that is what I'm going to be focusing on in the books I'm going to be writing. I'm going to be talking through the context and nuance of the class, of the people, who are the targets of the various things. And I hope you're going to enjoy them. And so basically, my plan is to announce the patron suggestions vote tomorrow, and I'm going to be naughty. It's going to basically be you're going to have till Sunday during the live to vote it because I want to. It's got to be done because we've got one of the patron lives is next week. Oh, I need to know what I'm preparing for. So that's going to be kind of quick. But there are lots of good suggestions. And yeah, the other thing I'm going to be talking about at some point is, well, interesting enough to talk about Australia, is of course the trip to Australia, which we're hoping to do this year. And it looks like I've got one funding submission pending. So far I haven't got any of the research grants for it. So, yeah, it could be entirely funded by work and by your generosity, which makes me feel slightly bad, but also always kind of warms my heart a bit, because you're also kind of generous and actually make naval history viable for me, which is fun. Right. Anyway, let's answer questions. Ryan Richards, the captain orders a dive. Actually dive at one scene to get under the waves as well. That is actually sensible for submarines. They are far better. They are not good on the surface. Thanks, Jack Ray. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Thanks for sitting with us. Glad it was. My coach. Very enjoyable. Thank you. Thank you. Colonel Cameron, are there any remains still left on the Falklands? Did any ships leave anything behind her? We have found stuff on the... There is stuff from Canopus ashore. There is stuff from the German ships. They have found their wrecks now off the coast of the Falklands. Carlos, thank you. Off a bit of a question. Build Trumps 114? We're waiting for basically everyone to be free up again, and then I'm hoping to get a special guest for our first one this year. John McCallie, I'm curious as to how long it took the RM battlecruisers to get up to top speed. Oh, there's an interesting stat about that. Let me just check my Battle of the Falklands notes. The British left port at 1000 hours. They didn't need to get up to top speed, though, but they caught them up into firing range by 1300 hours. So it was 5 hours for them to catch up the Germans. The point at which they were at firing range. And that's when they decide to engage when they're roughly about 10,000 meters apart. So if we go back to this, basically this is their starting points at roughly 1000 hours, and this is where they are at 1300 hours. Do you have to list your funders in research papers? I think it'd be amusing to see some of the reactions to YouTube being listed. Well, I've told you about job interviews. Yeah, there's some fun. There is some fun on that one. So I can harass my cousin, take some pictures on the way to the Arctic survey again. Yes, there is some stuff from Canopus still on the island, and the Falkland Islands has some wonderful museum artifacts. And if you ever do get the chance that they have some beautiful. The thing I would like to establish there is they had a railway at one point, and I would like to re-establish the railway on the Falkland Islands because I think everywhere should have a steam train. Cool, History Vanguard. HMS Tiger 90 nearly 1,000 views. Cool! Congratulations! Go watch his video on HMS Tiger. It's good. I've watched it. But I watched it far earlier. I didn't realise it got to 1,000 views. Hi, Stafford! Canopus met her end at Breakers in 1920. Yes, she survived World War I. Take care, Night 6 everyone. Thank you, Albazaski. Jackery. Patron research funding grant method. Yes, that's pretty much it. And the PayPal research grant funding method. Did40, thank you. Which causes my accountant fund, but leave that to one side. Dr. Kavanagh, thank you. Thank you, Ines Morrison. Thank you, HMS Verdun. Now, Gooch, Canopus served at Gallipoli. If you look at Kindle, Captain Grant wrote his experience was captain. Last time I checked out, it was a free download. I think it is. No worries, Stafford. I'll hopefully see you on Sunday. Chat day. Alright, Colin, thank you, Colin. How long does it take to get the big ships up to full speed? They had short notice at steam, and they were coaling. HMS Kent made her way out of the harbour in order to pursue the spaceships, and then the battlecruisers started catching up. Sturdy, in the fine tradition of British admirals, did actually order his personnel to have breakfast while they were waiting for the steam to go up. The PayPal method will probably be returning at this rate for the Australia trip because there is so much I can do, and there is only and I want to do more, and it feels bad, but it also feels good because it's going to sound strange. It's nice to get funding for my research. It makes me happy that my research is interesting to people. Anyway. Thank you very much, everyone. How useful would a Colossus class light carrier converted into a submarine depot ship for the Royal Navy? Probably fairly useful. There's a lot of space in it if you really want to do that sort of thing. Get them a copy of the Romney Hive and Dimtreach line. Pretty much that is what it is. It was an old coal line. It was an old sort of quarry and coal line which they had. It was pretty darn cool, and I'd like to establish it again. Thank you, Silver Bullet. And yes, Retard 26 guns. Yeah, if you want more about that, listen to Bill Trumps. So, goodness gracious me, that was the Ecuador Cruiser, Ecuador Treaty things and Christmas topics. Yeah. We have got one more video tomorrow of the Christmas series. And then the video, the live a day is over. I do realise the short of today hasn't gone up yet, but that's because it's currently refusing to go up. It's on my phone. I'm going to put it up before I go to bed. Thank you very much, everyone. And, thank you. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you've been enjoying the shorts. I do hope that you find a vehicle this weekend, Safford. You need one. John McCarthy, we currently have 2 Iranian warships crossing the South Pacific. Last I heard, they were near French Polynesia. There are 2 scenarios going through my head, and the first one is, please, let's pray for the safety of those crews in crossing the Pacific, because Iranian warships and actual maritime safety is always an interesting question. Other than that is, I'm fairly sure they are being kept a very close eye on by the various parties. Might be maritime patrol aircraft, might be a could be an LCS. That'd be quite a useful ship for doing that if you'd wanted to spot them and keep track of them. That's more than capable of doing that. Or other ships will be keeping track of them, rather like we do with Russian warships when they go wandering around. There was one recently going around the coast of the UK, and that had I'm fairly sure had possibly at least one watcher the entire time it was wandering anywhere close to anyone. The 76mm is a very good one. Hey, Ko-fi! Someone donated on Ko-fi! I forget I have Ko-fi. Thank you. That goes to the Iron Brew Fund. The Ko-fi Fund is I call the Iron Brew Fund. Please note that. But thank you very much. Thank you. Take care, everyone. And, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the videos. And please go watch the Long Patrol. I'll put a link to it from this video. I hope you enjoyed that on the 1st of November. Take care, everyone. Thank you. And good night.